Daniel waited until he thought the mill was loud enough to hide him. 3 stories of worthless wood, he told the real estate broker, nudging a walnut shell through a patch of flour dust with his boot. And every wheel in the place is dead. Ruth stood on the landing above them, with one hand on the warped banister. Neither had heard her come in from the house. The broker, a narrow woman in a camel-colored coat, looked up at the belts hanging slack from the ceiling. Reclaimed timber can bring money. See, Daniel said, even the worthless part is worth something once you tear it out. He laughed. The woman did not. Beyond the stone wall, Mercer Creek pushed steadily past the mill. Ruth could hear the water through the boards, deep and patient. Daniel had been wrong about the wheels. 2 were dead. The 3rd was not. He used to know that. Or at least, when he was 22 and still willing to listen, she had shown him where to put the grease. Ruth came down 1 step. The board complained beneath her shoe. Daniel spun around. For half a second, his face belonged to the boy who had been caught smoking behind the feed shed. Then he became 46 again. Square-jawed, tired around the eyes, and angry that she had made him feel embarrassed. "Mom, I thought you were at the pharmacy?" "I was." The broker straightened. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm Celia Klein. Your son asked me to take a preliminary look at my building." Daniel blew air through his nose. "Don't start. I just got here. You know what I mean." Ruth continued down the stairs, taking care with the last tread because its left edge dipped. Daniel reached toward her elbow. She moved past before he could touch it. Celia offered her hand. Ruth shook it. The woman's fingers were cold. "I understand this property has been in the family for some time," Celia said, "since 1912. Daniel leaned against a post, as if they were all participating in a conversation he had arranged properly. "Celia handles unusual properties. She's got a client who buys old industrial sites. Does he mill grain? No one mills grain here anymore." Ruth looked at the long row of silent equipment. Gray daylight came through the dirty windows and bars. It caught the suspended dust and made the place look busier than it was. On the wall above the roller stand hung Walter's green work jacket. She had meant to take it down. Then she had meant to leave it until spring. Spring had passed. "No," she said. "No one does?" Daniel softened at once, which was worse than the anger. "That's all I'm saying." He had acquired a funeral voice during Walter's illness. Low, careful, rounded at the edges. He used it when he wanted Ruth to agree before she had quite understood what she was agreeing to. Celia opened a leather folder. "I want to be clear, Mrs. Mercer. I'm not here to pressure you." Daniel thought an informal opinion might help the family understand its options. "What did you tell her the options were?" Daniel pushed himself upright. "Can we do this at the house?" "We're already doing it here." His mouth tightened. Celia glanced between them and closed the folder again. Ruth liked her a little for that. "I'll wait outside," she said. "You don't have to," Daniel told her. "I think I do." Her heels clicked across the floor, slowing when she reached the loose plank near the main doors. She noticed it without being warned, stepped over it, and let herself out. Cold March light filled the doorway and vanished when it shut. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. Fine white lines marked the cuffs of his navy coat. Drywall dust, Ruth guessed. He had come from a job, though lately he was always either coming from one or leaving one unfinished. "You embarrassed her." "I didn't invite her. I called twice. You said you wanted to stop by. I said I was bringing someone who could help." "No." "You said, I may bring somebody." That could have meant Melissa. It could have meant a man to look at the roof. What difference does it make? About 40 minutes of lying, if she drove from Columbus. Daniel looked toward the door, as though considering whether Celia could hear. She drove from Bellwether. 20 minutes then. Dad's been gone 6 months. Ruth's eyes moved to the jacket. Daniel saw and mistook the direction of her silence. "I know this is hard. Do you?" "Of course I do." The answer came too fast, but Ruth let it pass. He had loved Walter. Love did not become false simply because it was selective. Daniel walked to the roller stand and laid his palm on its dusty metal housing. "This place is eating money. Taxes, insurance, electricity. The electricity is shut off except in the office and workshop. That's not the point. It was one of your points. The roof estimate was $82,000. The roof estimate included slate on the cupola. It's a mill, Mom. You can't just put shingles on half of it and a tarp on the rest. The cupola hasn't vented anything since 1998. It doesn't need slate." He gave a short laugh without humor. "This is what you do. You grab one little detail and worry it until nobody can talk about the whole problem. Walter had said something similar whenever her figures interrupted one of his ideas. Ruth bent and picked up the walnut shell Daniel had kicked. There were tooth marks along its edge. Squirrels had found a way into the west loft again. The whole problem, she said, is that you brought a broker into a building you don't own. I'm trying to keep you from being buried under it. Then you should have brought a shovel. His mouth twitched before he could stop it. For one hopeful second, they were themselves again. Daniel used to laugh hardest when he was trying not to. Then he looked away. Celia thinks the salvage value could be significant. How significant? She can't say until her client sees it. And what does the client want besides the beams? The acreage, road access, creek frontage. There it is. What? The part worth something. Daniel shoved his hands into his coat pockets. Fine. The land is worth something, the building isn't. Does that make you feel better? No? What do you want me to say? Ruth looked around the machinery room. Nothing else today. Mom, you made your point. I haven't even shown you the numbers. Whose numbers? His jaw shifted. Ours. No, Daniel. Whose? He stared at her, and she saw exhaustion underneath the irritation. His hair needed cutting. A spot near his collar showed where he had nicked himself shaving. She wanted, absurdly, to ask whether he had eaten. Instead, she waited. He pulled a folded sheet from his inside pocket. Celia put together a range, very preliminary. If the buyer takes on demolition, if environmental review is clean, if the county doesn't complicate, that sounds like 3 ifs before a number. There's still a number. She did not take the paper. Daniel unfolded it himself. Even at the low end, you could buy one of those apartments near us outright, the brick place Melissa showed you. 2 bedrooms, elevator, no yard to keep up. I have a house. You have a house 40 yards from a condemned staircase. The staircase isn't condemned. Harris put a rope across it. Harris puts rope across anything he doesn't feel like fixing. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. Listen to yourself. I have been. She walked toward the front windows. The glass turned the creek bank pale and watery. In the gravel lot, Celia stood beside a silver car, speaking into her phone with her back to the mill. She looked relieved to be outside. Daniel came up behind Ruth, but left space between them. You'd be close, he said. That's the part you keep acting like you don't hear. 15 minutes from me and Melissa. You wouldn't be out here alone every night. I've been alone at night before, not like this. He was right, and she resented him for using the truth carelessly. During Walter's last year, solitude had come in pieces. 2 hours while he slept, 20 minutes in the grocery store, the length of a shower taken with the bathroom door open. After the funeral, it arrived all at once. It occupied his chair, his side of the bed, the hook where his cap had hung. It woke Ruth at 2 in the morning because the refrigerator motor stopped and the silence seemed to be listening. Daniel mistook her pause for surrender. You could take what you want from the house, he said. We'd help sort everything. There's no rush on that. We? Me and Melissa. Melissa wants to sort your father's workshop? I'm talking about the house. So am I. He sighed. This isn't about stealing Dad's tools. I didn't say it was. You didn't have to. Ruth turned from the window. Why today? What? Why did you bring a broker today? I've been trying to talk to you for months. You've been talking at me for months. Why did she need to come today? Daniel looked past her toward the creek. He had never been a gifted liar. As a child, he had confessed to breaking a window before anyone knew a window was broken. Adulthood had taught him delay, not skill. Celia had an opening, he said. Ruth waited. And there may be a buyer looking in this area, there may be. Yes, with money ready. That's generally how buyers work, and you need me to be ready. His eyes came back to hers. I need you to be realistic. There was something behind the sentence. Ruth could feel its shape without seeing it. Urgency, shame, arithmetic. Daniel's contracting business had survived lean years before, but lately he changed the subject whenever she asked about the hotel renovation on Route 9. At Christmas, he had joked that plywood cost more than truffles. In February, Melissa had returned a new coat and said the sleeves were wrong, though they had fit perfectly. Ruth did not ask. Not yet. She held out her hand for the paper. Daniel's shoulders lowered. He gave it to her. The range printed at the bottom was large enough to make the machinery room feel briefly smaller. It was not a fortune, Not after demolition costs, taxes, and whatever environmental contingencies meant in Celia's tidy footnote, but it was more money than Ruth had ever seen assigned to anything she owned. Daniel watched her read. "That's the low end," he said softly. "You'd never have to worry again." Ruth folded the page along its existing crease. "I've worried with less. That doesn't mean you should keep doing it." She slipped the paper into her cardigan pocket. "Tell Ms. Klein I'm sorry she drove out." His face changed. "That's it?" "That's it. You haven't thought about it." "I've thought about this building longer than you've been alive. That isn't the same as thinking clearly now." The words landed between them. Daniel heard them after they were spoken. He took one step forward. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. I meant you're grieving. So are you. That's exactly why we shouldn't drag this out." Ruth looked at him carefully. Grief had made Daniel restless. He wanted drawers emptied, clothes donated, accounts closed. 3 days after the funeral, he had carried Walter's shaving mug to the trash and then stood in the kitchen holding it for nearly an hour. He needed endings to happen before they could happen to him. "I am not signing anything," she said. "Not today, not with her, not with another broker, not with a salvage company." Daniel's face reddened slowly. "You're choosing this wreck over your family." "No, I'm telling my family he can't sell my property." "You know that's not what I mean. I know exactly what you mean." Outside, Celia ended her call and tucked the phone into her coat pocket. Daniel stared at Ruth, breathing through his nose. Then he nodded once, hard. "Fine." He headed for the doors. "Daniel." He stopped but did not turn. "You called all 3 wheels dead." "So?" "You shouldn't tell a buyer things you don't know." He glanced over his shoulder. "Which one works?" Ruth looked beyond him, past the roller stand and the hanging belts, toward the narrow stone passage leading down to the turbine chamber. The iron wheel waited below the floor, out of sight but not hidden, its shaft dark with the grease she had applied 12 days before. Walter entered the hospital for the last time. She could have told him. Instead, she picked up the squirrel-chewed walnut shell from the windowsill and closed her fingers around it. "Tell Ms. Klein the owner said no." Daniel pushed through the main doors hard enough to make the loose plank jump. Celia turned from her car. She read his face before he reached her and tucked both hands into her coat pockets. Ruth watched through the window as Daniel spoke. He kept his back to the mill. Celia said something and he shook his head. Then she looked toward Ruth. Ruth lifted one hand. Celia gave a small, embarrassed wave. Daniel did not look back before getting into his truck. The engine started with a throaty burst that had annoyed Walter every time Daniel visited. Celia remained beside her car until he pulled onto the county road. Only then did she return to the mill. She stopped just inside the doors. "I owe you an apology. You didn't know. I knew he wasn't the owner. That ought to have slowed you down." "It should have." Ruth had expected an excuse and found herself less prepared for agreement. Celia glanced around the machinery room. "For what it's worth, I didn't give him an offer. I gave him a broad estimate based on the acreage, road frontage, and photographs he sent." "What photographs?" "Exterior, mostly. Some inside." "When?" "The first email was 3 weeks ago." Ruth felt the walnut shell pressing its ridges into her palm. 3 weeks ago, Daniel had brought her groceries and replaced the batteries in the smoke alarms. He had spent 20 minutes in the mill while she made coffee. "Did he tell you I wanted to sell?" "He said the family was preparing to discuss it." That's a careful sentence. It was probably meant to be. Celia's cheeks had colored. She was not as young as Ruth first thought. Fine lines showed around her mouth, and one heel of her expensive shoes had collected gray mill dust. "What does your client build?" Ruth asked. "They don't. They salvage the structure, then usually resell the cleared parcel. So they don't care what happens here. They care what the materials are worth." That's what Daniel said. Celia looked up at the beams. "These are old-growth chestnut. Some of them, anyway. You can't buy lumber like that now. You can if somebody cuts down a mill." The broker accepted that without flinching. "Yes." Ruth opened the main door for her. "Drive safely." At the threshold, Celia paused. "The estimate leaves out quite a bit. I told Daniel that." "Such as?" "Environmental review, waterway restrictions, demolition access. The condition of the stonework, whether the county considers any part of the structure historically significant. All reasons the number could go down." "Yes. You told him that too?" "Several times." Ruth nodded. Daniel had not misunderstood. he had selected. Celia stepped outside, then turned. If you ever do want an opinion that is yours, call me directly. Not because I'm trying to list it. I mean an honest opinion. I've had an honest opinion today. The corner of Celia's mouth moved. You certainly have. After her car disappeared, the mill settled around Ruth. The quiet was never complete. Water moved beneath the tail race boards. Wind worried a loose strip of flashing on the west side. Somewhere overhead, a squirrel resumed whatever business Daniel had interrupted. Ruth opened her hand and placed the damaged walnut on the roller stand. She should have gone home. The room was cold, and her right knee had begun its dull complaint. Instead, she crossed behind the grain cleaner and unhooked a flashlight from its nail. The narrow passage to the turbine chamber began beside the old bolting cabinet. Walter had once painted the door yellow, so visitors would stop mistaking it for a closet. The paint had faded to the color of old butter. A rope barred the stone stairs. Harris says no, read the cardboard tied to it in black marker. Ruth ducked under. The air grew damper as she descended. 6 steps down, the daylight from the machinery room gave out. She switched on the flashlight and aimed it at the treads. Harris had marked a crack in the 7th with orange paint. It had not widened since January, but she stepped over it anyway. At the bottom, the chamber smelled of creek water, iron, and cold stone. A rusted ladder led to the old north wheel inspection platform. Ruth ignored it. The smaller turbine sat behind a waist-high guard, connected by gears to the vertical shaft that rose through the ceiling. Tour visitors rarely came this far. There was no picturesque wooden wheel turning in a spray of sunlight. There was only cast iron, black grease, and plumbing thick enough to embrace. Ruth rested her hand on the housing. Cold traveled into her palm. Worthless, she said. Her voice sounded foolish in the small chamber. She set the flashlight on the ledge and removed a wooden box from beneath the guard. Inside lay a grease gun, 2 wrenches, a rag stiff with oil, and the crank handle Walter had stopped using 17 years earlier. She fitted the handle onto the maintenance socket. The first pull gave her nothing. Ruth shifted her feet. Don't be dramatic. She pulled again. The socket moved the width of a pencil mark, then stopped. For one frightened moment, she wondered if she had lied to herself upstairs. 12 days before Walter went into the hospital was not 6 months ago. A machine did not care that a woman had been busy signing hospice forms and learning which casserole dishes belonged to whom. She removed the handle and checked the teeth with the flashlight. One held a dark clot of grease mixed with grit. She cleaned it with the corner of the rag, reset the handle, and leaned her weight into it. The gear turned. Above her, the vertical shaft answered with a soft metal knock. She worked the crank through half a rotation, rested, then completed another. Slow movement only, enough to spread lubricant over the bearing surfaces, enough to feel, through the handle, that the shaft was not seized, not enough to prove what the water would do. The head gate remained closed upstream. The intake grate could be packed with winter debris. The leather cups might have dried. The bearing that had frightened Walter all those years ago might heat after 10 minutes under load. Worked was a broad word. Daniel would use those uncertainties to pry it open. Ruth completed 4 rotations, wiped the handle, and returned it to the box. When she climbed back into the machinery room, afternoon light had shifted toward the creek windows. Her knee objected to the final stair. She gripped the yellow doorframe and waited for the ache to ease. Harris's sign swung behind her. She turned it around so the words faced the wall. At the house, the answering machine blinked red on the kitchen counter. Walter had refused to replace the landline because cell phones, according to him, were designed by people who wanted to be interrupted while driving. Ruth still had his flip phone in a drawer, wrapped in its charger. She pressed the button. "Mom, it's me." Daniel's voice filled the kitchen. "I'm sorry about how that went. I shouldn't have surprised you. Melissa says I came on too strong. She's right. Call me when you're ready." A pause followed. Ruth could hear road noise behind him. "But please actually think about the offer. That's all I'm asking." The machine announced the time and went silent. Ruth removed Celia's estimate from her cardigan. She set it beside the sugar bowl, filled the kettle, and stared at the range printed at the bottom while the water heated. Walter would have called it insulting. He would have paced between the sink and table, naming every repair he had made, as though the buyer owed him for memory. Then, after midnight, he would have unfolded the paper and studied it alone. Ruth made 1 cup of tea and reached automatically for a second mug. Her fingers stopped at the cabinet. She took down only the blue one. Dinner was toast and an egg eaten at the table without a placemat. She told herself she preferred simple food at night. The slice of ham in the refrigerator disagreed, as did the potatoes in the pantry and the green beans she had canned in August. Cooking, for one, exposed the difference between appetite and effort. When darkness reached the windows, Ruth turned on the light over the stove. She carried Celia's estimate into the office, where metal filing cabinets lined one wall. Walter's desk occupied the center of the room. Hers, smaller and neater, stood beneath the window. She opened the bottom drawer and took out the mill accounts. The figures were not mysterious. Property tax, insurance, minimal electrical service, roof patches, masonry work postponed twice. Harris's invoices, many of them reduced past fairness. The mill had cost them $11,800 the previous year, not counting Ruth's unpaid time or the favors Walter had collected in place of cash. The number looked different now that his pension check had stopped. Ruth wrote it again on a yellow pad. Then she listed the money available without selling the house: savings, her Social Security, the small balance in the mill account, and Walter's boat. She drew a line through the last item. The boat was not money. It was an 18-foot monument to intentions. Walter had polished it every April and taken it out exactly twice in 5 years. Daniel had already said he wanted to get the motor serviced before summer. Ruth put the pen down. At 9:14, the phone rang. "Did he apologize?" Melissa asked. "He left a message." "That is not what I asked." Ruth leaned back in her chair. Melissa had a talent for sounding amused while administering a correction. It was one of the things Ruth liked about her, though she rarely admitted it. "He said he was sorry for surprising me." "So no, he thinks that counts. He comes by it honestly." Ruth's eyes moved to Walter's desk. "Careful. I adored Walter. I also heard him apologize for backing into my car by saying the driveway was narrow." Despite herself, Ruth laughed. Melissa grew quiet. "Daniel shouldn't have brought the broker." "No, I didn't know he was doing it today." "But you knew he'd contacted her." A pause. "Yes." Ruth waited. "He's worried about you," Melissa said. "That sentence has done a great deal of work today." "He is worried. He's also being pushy and making a mess. Both can be true. Why is he in such a hurry?" Melissa exhaled. "You need to ask him." "I just did. Then ask when he's less angry." "He came here less angry. He brought a broker with him." "I know." Ruth touched the corner of the yellow pad. "Is the business in trouble?" The silence on the line was small but complete. Melissa said, "You need to ask Daniel." "Now I'm asking you, and I'm trying very hard not to be the wife who tells her husband's mother something he should tell her himself. That sounds tiring. It is exhausting." Ruth heard the affection under the irritation. That made the silence more troubling, not less. "Are you all right?" Ruth asked. "I'm not asking you for anything." "I didn't say you were." "I know. That came out wrong." A cabinet closed on Melissa's end. Then the squeak of a faucet handle. "Don't sign anything because he's scared," Melissa said quietly. "That's all I'm going to say." After they hung up, Ruth remained at her desk until the office clock chimed 10. She returned the mill accounts to the drawer, but kept the yellow pad out. On a fresh page, she wrote 3 names: Harris Boone, Lena Ortiz, May Sutter. Walter had disliked lists made before he understood their purpose. He said they turned possibilities into obligations. Ruth had always thought that was precisely what made them useful. She circled Lena's name. Lena's bakery opened at 5:30. The woman herself arrived long before that, swearing at ovens and listening to old country music loud enough to rattle the front windows. Ruth had done her quarterly books for 6 years and knew 3 things about her. She hated surprises, she paid invoices on Tuesdays, and she had once said she would sell her own front teeth for a steady supply of local rye. Ruth drew a second circle around the name. Then she crossed the room to Walter's desk, opened the shallow center drawer, and took out the key to the upstream gate. The key was longer than Ruth's hand, iron-shanked and ugly, with a bow polished smooth by generations of Mercer palms. Walter had tied a red cloth around it after dropping it in the grass one spring. The cloth was still there, faded pink and stiff with age. Ruth put the key in her cardigan pocket beside Celia's estimate. At 4:40 the next morning, she parked behind Lena's bakery and found the back door propped open with a 50-pound sack of bread flour. Warm, yeasty air rolled into the alley. Patsy Cline was singing from somewhere near the ovens. Ruth knocked on the metal door. Unless you're butter, come back at 6, Lena called. Ruth stepped around the sack. I brought no butter. Lena Ortiz appeared from behind a speed rack carrying 2 sheet pans of rolls. She wore striped pajama bottoms beneath her apron and had flour in her black and gray hair. At 58, she moved like someone perpetually late for an appointment she had scheduled herself. You're either in trouble, she said, or you finally accepted that decent people wake before sunrise. I need to talk to you. Trouble then. Lena shoved the pans into a wheeled rack and pointed at a stool beside the prep table. Sit. Don't touch anything unless it catches fire. Then use the red extinguisher, not the silver one. The silver one ruins chocolate. Ruth sat. The bakery kitchen occupied the back half of a narrow brick storefront. Every surface held a bowl, tray, cooling loaf, or folded towel. A mixer big enough to bathe in labored beside the walk-in refrigerator. Near the office door, several cardboard boxes had been stacked beneath a handwritten sign reading, "Things landlord claims are a fire hazard." Lena poured coffee into a chipped mug that said, "World's okayest boss," and handed it to Ruth. What did Daniel do? Ruth looked up. Why do you think Daniel did something? Because Walter is dead, God rest his loud soul. And when you come to my kitchen before 5, the list of possible culprits gets short. He brought a broker to the mill. Lena stopped reaching for her own coffee. Without asking? He says he tried to ask. Men use the word tried when they mean they pictured doing it correctly. Ruth warmed her hands around the mug. Lena studied her. Does he want you to sell? Yes. Do you? No. All right. The answer came so simply that Ruth felt a small pressure behind her eyes. She drank coffee before it could become anything. Lena returned to the work table and began shaping dough. What do you need from me? How much rye flour do you use? The dough stopped beneath Lena's palms. Why? A week. Depends. In winter, 70 to 90 pounds, more if the seeded loaf moves. What do you pay? Also depends. Lena, I know what you're asking, and I'm trying to decide whether to throw this dough at you. That would affect your cost per loaf. Lena scraped the dough from her fingers. The mill hasn't produced food-grade flour since Bill Clinton was in office. 17 years. That is not the correction you think it is. The turbine will turn. You know that? I turned the shaft yesterday. By hand? Yes. With water? No. Lena picked up her coffee, took a long swallow, and set it down. A wheel turning is not flour, I'm aware. Then there are the stones, the screens, pest control, moisture, storage, insurance, state inspection. Probably 6 things I don't know because I bake the flour. I don't interrogate its childhood. I'm aware of those too. Are you? Ruth let the sharpness sit. She had come because Lena did not wrap bad news in a towel before delivering it. Walter and I ran that mill for 26 years, she said. Walter ran it. There it was. Lena winced almost at once, but she did not take it back. Ruth looked into the dark surface of her coffee. That's what people saw. The oven timer sounded. Lena crossed the kitchen, pulled out 2 trays of browned rolls, and stood with the oven door open longer than necessary. Heat flushed her face when she turned. I'm sorry, she said. You're not the only one who thinks it. I did your books with you every quarter for 6 years. I know you did the money. I did more than the money. Lena set the trays on the rack. Then tell me. Ruth nearly began with the delivery route. She nearly told her about the frozen winter when Walter's hands split at the knuckles, and she learned to dress the stones because he could not grip the crane handle. She could have listed every belt she had laced, every supplier she had kept from leaving, every night she had stayed late after finishing her bookkeeping job in town. Lists were safe. Lists did not require her to say why nobody remembered. I know which turbine is usable, she said. I know the old line. I know enough to find out what I don't know. That's not the same as reopening? No. Good, because reopening would be crazy. I'm not reopening anything today. I'm asking whether, if I can produce a safe flour that meets your standards, you'd test it. Lena folded her arms. For free? She asked. At cost. Then no. Ruth frowned. If you're serious, charge me enough to learn whether this can be a business. Free flour teaches you nothing, except that bakers enjoy free flour. At cost is not free. It is when your own labor mysteriously costs 0. Women our age have been doing that particular magic trick long enough. Ruth looked at the rolls steaming on their trays. What would you pay? Lena named a number per pound. It was less than Ruth had hoped and more than bulk rye brought from the distributor. For how much? 25 pounds. One test. And I reject it if the grind is wrong, if it smells wrong, if it behaves wrong, or if Mercury is in retrograde and I feel nervous. Fair? No, it isn't. It's bakery purchasing. Ruth set down her mug. Lena eyed her. You don't have grain? Not yet. You don't have a working mill? Not yet. You don't have a food permit? Not yet. A smile threatened Lena's mouth. You're very annoying before sunrise. I've been told I'm worse later. Lena turned back to the dough. On the shelf behind her, a certified envelope had been opened and flattened beneath a salt container. Ruth recognized the letterhead of Dempsey Properties, the company that owned the storefront. Is that your lease renewal? Lena's hands pressed harder into the dough. It's an attempted mugging with parking included. How much? Nearly double. Ruth thought of the stacked boxes beneath the fire hazard sign. Can they do that? Apparently, walls become twice as valuable when a fitness studio wants them. What will you do? Sell one roll for $12. Lena. I have 8 months. The way she said it ended the subject. Ruth stood and carried her mug to the sink. Leave it, Lena said. You wash cups like they owe you money. At the back door, Ruth paused. If I can do this, I'll need an honest test. If you can do it, you'll get one. Thank you. Don't thank me. Bring rye. Outside, dawn had begun turning the alley from black to blue. Ruth sat in her car with the heater blowing against her knees and wrote Lena's price on the back of Celia's estimate. Under it, she wrote 25 pounds. The two numbers looked ridiculous together. The possible sale of the mill on one side, a bakery order barely large enough to fill a sack on the other. She folded the paper and drove home. Harris Boone answered his phone on the 9th ring. If this is about the rope, he said, the rope stays. It's my staircase. And it'll be your broken neck. I need you to look at the turbine. A silence followed, then the sound of a television being muted. What did you do? Nothing. Ruth. I rotated the shaft. You went downstairs alone. I have been going downstairs alone since 1979. Walter was alive for most of that. He wasn't holding my hand. Harris exhaled. I'll be there at 10. He arrived at 9:30 in a faded green pickup with one red door. Harris had repaired mill machinery across 3 counties before arthritis began turning his fingers inward. He could still do precise work, but afterward his hands swelled until he could not button a shirt. Ruth had once watched him hide that fact from Walter by wearing the same flannel for 3 days. He entered the mill carrying a canvas tool bag and another length of rope. That's excessive, Ruth said. I brought a longer one. He rehung the sign across the turbine stairs before letting her follow him down. In the chamber, Harris said nothing for several minutes. He removed the inspection cover, shone a light into the housing, and touched 2 fingers to the grease on the shaft. Ruth held the flashlight when asked and kept quiet when not. He fitted the crank and turned it. The gears answered with the same soft knock. Harris completed a rotation, then another. Not seized. I told you. That is not the same as working. Lena said that. Smart woman. She also agreed to test 25 pounds. The crank stopped. Harris looked at her. His eyebrows had grown wild and white since Christmas, giving him a permanently astonished expression. Of what? Rye? Ground with what? The East Stones. The East Stones haven't been dressed in 18 years. 17. That year isn't going to save us. Can they be dressed? Probably. Can the turbine drive them? Maybe. Can we find out? Yes. Ruth smiled. I did not say yes to whatever you just decided, Harris said. You said we. I said the Stones. You said us. I regret it already. They climbed back out and walked the mill line from the turbine shaft to the East Stone casing. Harris checked bearings, belt joints, guards, and floor supports. He spoke mostly in grunts. Every third grunt became a problem Ruth wrote in Walter's old pocket notebook. At the main drive pulley, he stopped. Belts dry rotted. We have another in storage, if squirrels haven't eaten it. They prefer walnuts. At the stone floor, he crouched beside a timber support and pushed the tip of his screwdriver into a dark patch. The metal sank half an inch. Ruth's optimism tightened. How bad? Bad enough not to run weight above it. Can you brace it? I can tell a carpenter where to brace it. Daniel could do it. Harris looked up slowly. Does Daniel know what you're doing? He knows one wheel isn't dead. That is not what I asked. No. Harris stood with care, bracing one hand on the casing. Then call somebody else. For the carpentry? For all of it. Ruth closed the notebook. Why? Because Walter made me promise I wouldn't help you get this place running again. The mill seemed to shift around her, though nothing moved. When? After the bearing failure, 17 years ago. He asked you to promise that? He made me, and you agreed? He was my friend, so was I. Harris looked down at his swollen hands. That's why I'm telling you. Ruth waited for the rest. None came. You've kept his promise 17 years, she said. You can consider it fulfilled. That isn't how promises work. No, that's how control works. His head came up. Ruth regretted the words, then did not. She slipped Walter's notebook into her cardigan. I'm going to inspect the upstream gate, she said. Not alone. Are you helping? Harris picked up his tool bag. His face had gone hard in the way men's faces did when they wanted pain mistaken for principle. I'm keeping you from killing yourself, he said. Walter would appreciate that. She ducked beneath the rope and climbed. Harris followed her out of the chamber, carrying the flashlight because he could not yet bring himself to carry the key. The gatehouse stood 30 yards upstream, a squat stone shed partly swallowed by honeysuckle. Ruth took the creek path slowly. Rain had softened the ground, and last autumn's sycamore leaves lay slick beneath her shoes. Harris walked behind her. If you're waiting for me to fall, she said, you could at least make conversation. I'm deciding how long to stay mad. At me, at Walter. That puts you in a crowded room. Harris made a sound that might have been a laugh. The gatehouse door had settled into its frame. Ruth leaned her shoulder against it while turning the iron key. On the third shove, the bottom scraped over stone and opened inward. A colony of ladybugs had gathered in one upper corner. Rust striped the walls beneath the handwheel that raised the intake gate. The screw mechanism looked dry but intact. Through the grate in the floor, black water pressed against branches, bottles, dead leaves, and one white plastic lawn chair that had lodged upside down in the channel. Harris aimed his flashlight downward. There's your first problem. I didn't put the chair there. Good. I was worried grief had changed your decorating. Ruth gripped the handwheel. It shifted perhaps an inch, then resisted. Stop, Harris said. I barely moved it, and now you're going to move it barely again until something snaps. He set down the tool bag and worked oil into the exposed threads. His fingers were careful, but Ruth saw him flex them afterward. She waited until he nodded, then applied pressure. The wheel creaked through a quarter turn. Water hissed somewhere below. Back, Harris said. Ruth reversed the wheel. The hiss stopped. They looked at each other. The gate seal leaks, he said. It always leaked. Not that much. You heard the turbine answer? I heard water go somewhere. Water wasn't going 1 second before. That is generally how gates work. Harris wiped oil from the screw. You cannot run it with the intake packed like that, and you cannot clear the intake alone. I know. You'll need waiters, hooks, a safety line, and somebody downstream watching the grate. I know. Say it like you believe it. I know, Harris. He sat on the edge of an old crate. The boards bowed beneath him. The last time that wheel ran, the upper bearing started screaming. Walter shut the gate, but not fast enough. The drive belt jumped and tore through the guard. No one was hurt. Because I was standing 2 feet to the left. Ruth remembered the belt striking the floor. The sound had been like a rifle shot. Walter had ordered everybody out, though everybody consisted of Ruth, Harris, and a driver, waiting for 2 sacks of cornmeal. You fixed the guard, she said. I replaced it. That doesn't tell us why the bearing ran hot. Walter said the oil channel clogged. Walter said a lot of things when he wanted a clean answer. Ruth looked through the floor grate at the moving water. What did you think happened? The shaft might have shifted. The foundation under the lower pillow block had been wet for years. Could have been misalignment. Could have been the load. Could have been the oil channel, if we get lucky. Did you tell Walter that? Repeatedly. And? He decided not running it was cheaper than finding out. That sounded like Walter near the end of the mill's life. He had called it caution, though his caution arrived only after years of spending money they did not have. The next morning, Harris said, he came to my shop and made me promise I'd never help you restart it. Why me? He knew you'd be the one who tried. Ruth's hand remained on the cold iron wheel. Did he say that? Not in a flattering way. What did he say? Harris studied the flashlight in his hands. He said you couldn't stand to let a thing end. Creek water slapped beneath the floor. Ruth pictured Walter at Harris's shop, leaning on the scarred counter, making decisions about the future, while she sat 10 miles away, reconciling invoices. The insult hurt, because it contained enough truth to find a tender place. She had kept shoes past repair, friendships past kindness, and a marriage argument alive for 9 years, because neither of them would admit they had forgotten how it began. Maybe he knew me, she said. He knew you'd take responsibility for whatever he left lying around. That is not the same thing. No. Harris rose. He was scared. So he made you promise. He trusted me. He trusted you to distrust me. That isn't fair. No, it isn't. She turned toward the door. Ruth. What? I'm here. She looked back. Harris's jaw worked before he spoke. I have kept that promise every time I checked the foundation, every time I greased that shaft, every time I told you not to go downstairs. I told myself I was honoring Walter, but I was still here. For him? At first. The ladybugs shifted in their corner, dozens of tiny red shells crawling over one another. Harris picked up the tool bag. If we inspect the bearing and the foundation is sound, I'll help with one dry test. No water. Then we decide. We? Don't make me regret pronouns again. Ruth stepped outside before he could see her smile. They spent the next 2 hours measuring the shaft alignment and opening inspection plates. By noon, Harris had a list nearly as long as hers. The good news was modest. The lower foundation had not visibly shifted. The bad news required new seals, fresh belts, safety guards, timber bracing, and an electrician willing to inspect wiring that had last been modern in the first Bush administration. A dry test won't grind anything, Harris warned as he loaded his tools. It will tell us whether the line moves. It'll tell us whether the line moves for 30 seconds. That's 30 more than yesterday. He shut the pickup door. Who's dressing the stones? You. No, you've done it. Not since my hands turned into decorative claws. I'll find someone. There are perhaps 6 people east of the Mississippi who know those stones, and 4 of them are dead. Then my choices have narrowed. Harris pointed one bent finger at her. Do not call Daniel until you know exactly what you're asking him to brace. I hadn't said I would. You made the face. What face? The mother face where you've already volunteered a man, while pretending you're respecting his free will. That sounds useful. I wish I knew how to make it. He drove away shaking his head. Ruth ate half a cheese sandwich at the kitchen counter and called May Sutter. May answered with machinery roaring behind her. If you're selling something, she shouted, I'm recently deceased. It's Ruth. The machinery stopped. That's worse, May said. I need to ask you about your buckwheat. You planning to eat some? I'm planning to mill it. Silence. Then May laughed so hard she coughed. Ruth waited. Oh, Lord, May said. You almost got me. I'm serious. That's what makes it good. I'd like to buy a test load. With what mill? Mine. Walter's been dead half a year, and you've already lost your mind. He'd be furious. He often was. May laughed again, but less comfortably. No, you don't know what price I'm offering. You don't know what price I'm charging. Then we have something to discuss. No, Ruth. We have an old building, a dead man, and you pretending both are a business. The line went quiet. Ruth looked at the yellow pad beside the phone. May's name remained circled once. How much do you have stored? She asked. Enough? Is it cleaned? Cleaner than anything that came out of Mercer Mill the year Calvin worked there. There it was, sooner than Ruth had expected. May, no. You called about grain. I said no. That is a full transaction. The call ended. Ruth put down the receiver. She finished the sandwich, wrapped the uneaten crust in a paper napkin, and drove west toward the Sutter farm. May's place sat on a high ridge where the soil was thin, and wind seemed to come from 4 directions at once. Her late father had raised cattle there. May had sold the herd, repaired the terraces, and planted grains most farmers dismissed as birdseed. Walter had mocked the first buckwheat field until a restaurant in Bellwether put May's name on its menu. Ruth found her inside a metal grain shed, sewing a torn bag. May wore brown coveralls and red-framed glasses. Her silver hair had been cut so short that it stood upright along the crown. You hung up, Ruth said. May kept sewing. It's how phones know you're finished. I need grain, so buy it from somebody who likes you. I don't need to be liked. That's lucky. Ruth looked around the shed. Pallets held neatly labeled sacks of buckwheat, rye, and spelt. A moisture meter lay beside a clipboard on the workbench. "I'll pay cash on delivery," she said. May bit the thread and tied it off. "You think this is about credit? No. You think I'm still mad about $200 worth of grain? It was more than that. You remember, I kept the accounts." May set the bag aside. "Of course you did. Calvin Sutter had worked at the mill for one season, the year before Daniel left for college. A gear in the grain cleaner cracked while Calvin was feeding May's rye. Walter said Calvin had overloaded it. He docked the cost of spoiled grain from Calvin's final wages and told the story for years afterward, usually while demonstrating the machinery to visitors. Ruth had known the gear was already damaged. She had recorded 2 repairs to the same tooth before Calvin's first day. "Walter was wrong," she said. May removed her glasses and wiped them on her sleeve. "Convenient time to discover that. I knew then." The glasses stopped in May's hand. Ruth felt the old instinct rise. Explain the month, the bills, Walter's temper, Calvin's drinking, the way every difficulty had seemed attached to 3 others. She let the explanations pass without speaking. "I knew the gear had failed before," she said. "I should have contradicted him. You were standing right there." "Yes." "He called Calvin careless in front of 6 people." "Yes." "And when Calvin looked at you, you looked down at your little book." Ruth could see the page. She remembered the blue column lines and the wet thumbprint Calvin left beside his name when he took his pay envelope. "Yes," she said. May put her glasses back on. Her eyes were bright behind the red frames. "My brother died thinking every Mercer believed he was a fool. I didn't think it. You just let everybody else think it." The grain shed held the clean, dry smell of harvest. Wind pressed against the metal walls and made them tick. Ruth nodded once. "I did." May turned away and straightened a sack that did not need straightening. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Ruth said. "I'm asking to buy grain. Those are different things. You always were good at putting pain in the correct column. That doesn't mean it disappears from the ledger." May stood with both hands resting on the sack. "How much?" she asked. "1 test load. Buckwheat and rye, if you'll sell both. Cash on delivery. Yes, no family price. I didn't ask for one. You haul it." Ruth pictured the trunk of her Buick. "I'll arrange it." May named a price that was fair enough to be unfriendly. Ruth held out her hand. May looked at it for several seconds before shaking. Her grip was dry and firm. "This does not settle Calvin," she said. "No. And if your flour ruins my grain, I'll tell everyone." "That seems fair. It isn't meant to be." May released her hand and picked up the needle again. Ruth reached the shed door before May spoke. "If you actually get those stones turning," she said, still facing the workbench, "I want to see the first batch." Ruth looked back. "Why?" May pushed the needle through the torn burlap. "To make sure somebody tells the truth about what comes out." Ruth drove home with no grain in her car and the first real order she had placed for the mill in 17 years. The distinction pleased her until she reached the bridge and saw the roof. From the road, the missing slate looked like a dark bite taken from the cupola. The west gutter sagged. Paint hung from the loading doors in long gray curls. For one unreasonable moment, she wondered whether Daniel had been right and the building had merely waited until Walter died to reveal how tired it was. Then she saw the decorative road wheel through the trees, broad and picturesque and utterly still. "Not you," she told it. Harris returned 2 mornings later for the dry test, accompanied by a cardboard tray holding 2 coffees and a paper sack translucent with grease. "I brought breakfast," he said. "It's how I apologize without admitting fault." "What are you apologizing for?" "Don't ruin it." They ate egg sandwiches on the roller stand beneath Walter's jacket. Harris removed the egg from his and folded it into a napkin. "You bought an egg sandwich. I wanted bacon and bread. That's called a bacon sandwich. They charge more if you know the name." Ruth put Walter's pocket notebook between them. She had added prices beside the repair list. The total at the bottom had been crossed out twice and rewritten higher each time. Harris read it without touching his coffee. "That carpenter's estimate is low," he said. "He hasn't seen inside the support. Then it's fiction. The electrician can come Tuesday. He'll scream." He sounded calm on the phone. "That's because he hasn't seen the fuse panel." Harris took another bite and turned the notebook sideways, as though the figures might improve from a different angle. "You didn't include stone dressing. I haven't found anyone. I called Leon Pike." Ruth knew the name. Leon had dressed millstones throughout Ohio and Pennsylvania before moving south. Walter once described him as the only man alive who could make granite sing, then refused to pay his mileage. Isn't he in Tennessee? North Carolina. His daughter says he doesn't travel. That sounds final. It's Leon. He says no until the price irritates him less than boredom. Did you ask the price? I wanted you to have one peaceful morning. Ruth closed the notebook. Let's see whether we need him. The spare belt hung in the second-floor storage loft, rolled around a wooden core beneath a canvas sheet. Squirrels had not eaten it. Mice had. Harris lifted a chewed section into the light. Your walnuts have diversified. The damage ran along one edge for nearly 3 feet. The belt could not carry loads safely, but Harris decided they could use the undamaged length to connect the hand crank to the lower line and turn the east stone gearing one slow revolution at a time. No motor, he said. No water, no enthusiasm. I left mine at the house. You brought enough. They spent an hour cleaning pulleys and another fitting the temporary belt. Ruth worked from the floor while Harris climbed the short maintenance ladder. When she reached to steady it, he scowled. I'm not fragile. The ladder is. That's different. It will feel similar on the way down. At last, Harris took the crank below, while Ruth stood beside the east stone casing. She laid 2 fingers against the wooden housing. Ready? He called. Yes. The belt tightened. One overhead pulley moved, then a second. The line shaft rolled with a dry shudder. Dust drifted from the rafters. The east stone gearing engaged with a low wooden clack that Ruth felt through her fingertips. Keep going, she called. The gear turned a quarter revolution and stopped. Below, Harris grunted. Metal knocked once. Stop, Ruth said. I have stopped. She removed the inspection panel from the stone casing. The flashlight showed old flour hardened around the lower gear teeth, gray as mortar. One tooth bore a shallow split. Harris climbed up, breathing harder than the stairs justified. His hands had reddened around the knuckles. Binding? He asked. She pointed. He crouched, stared into the housing, and swore with professional precision. Can it be cleaned? Yes. The split? Maybe pinned, maybe replaced. Can Leon do that? Leon can insult it until it heals. Ruth sat back on her heels. But even if we free the gearing, we still haven't loaded the shaft. We still haven't opened the water. We still don't know if the stones are sound. Are you trying to discourage me? I am trying to keep the facts from getting trampled by your personality. She looked at his hands. You're done for today. I decide that. Can you button your left cuff? He glanced down. The cuff hung open. That button is too small, he said. It was larger this morning. His mouth flattened. Ruth stood and began gathering tools. Harris remained crouched beside the casing. I can find somebody else for the heavy work, she said. You'll find somebody who knows machinery. That isn't the same thing, I know. Don't make that face. What face? The one where you enjoy being needed. She wanted to deny it. Instead, she carried the tools downstairs. The electrician screamed on Tuesday. Not literally, though when he opened the fuse panel, he produced a long whistle and asked whether Ruth had notified the Smithsonian. His estimate covered only the workshop, machinery room lighting, emergency shutoffs, and outlets required for inspection. It did not include rewiring the upper floors. The carpenter's estimate rose after he opened the timber support. The new belt cost more than Ruth's first car. Food-safe cleaning, screens, guard fabrication, and liability coverage pushed the total beyond what remained in the mill account. That evening, Ruth walked out to the pole barn and uncovered Walter's boat. It sat on its trailer in polished blue and white, ready for a summer that would not come. Walter had named it Ruthless. He claimed it was a tribute. Ruth had threatened to strike him with the champagne bottle at the naming. She climbed into the stern and sat behind the wheel. The vinyl seat gave a small sigh. In the side compartment, she found Daniel's tackle box, 2 faded life jackets, and a bag of lemon drops melted into a single yellow stone. Walter had kept the fuel stabilized, the battery charged, the chrome bright. The boat was perhaps the only machine he had maintained more carefully, while using less. Ruth called the dealer in Bellwether the next morning. He inspected it, named a figure, and waited for her to bargain. Add 800, she said. Mrs. Mercer, I'll have to service the motor. My husband serviced it in October. It's July before people buy boats. It's March before people who want a good boat find one. They settled 400 above his first offer. Ruth signed the sale agreement and scheduled pickup for Friday. She called Daniel Thursday night. If you want your tackle box, come get it. Why? Because the boat is being sold. The silence lasted so long, she checked whether the call had dropped. You sold Dad's boat? I am selling it. To who? Bellwether Marine. You didn't ask me. It's becoming a popular family tradition. Dad wanted me to have that boat. He wanted you to go fishing with him. You were usually working. That is not fair. No, it isn't. Daniel arrived Friday 10 minutes before the dealer's truck. Melissa sat beside him. Ruth had expected her to stay in the cab, but she followed Daniel into the pole barn, wearing office clothes and low black shoes that sank into the soft ground. Daniel stood beside the trailer with both hands on his hips. How much? Ruth told him. That's at least $5,000 under retail. It needs to sell now. Why now? The mill needs electrical work, structural bracing, and a drive belt. He stared at her. You're selling Dad's boat to fix that wreck? I'm selling my boat to repair my mill. Melissa closed her eyes briefly. Daniel looked at her. You knew? She called me last night. And you didn't stop her? Ruth answered before Melissa could. You both seem confused about what marriage permits. A truck backed into the drive. Its reverse alarm beeped steadily. Daniel stepped closer. Call this off? No. I'll buy it. With what? His face changed. Ruth saw it, the same brief nakedness she had seen when she asked why he was in a hurry. Melissa looked at the gravel. Daniel recovered. Give me 30 days. The electrician comes Tuesday. You're throwing good money after bad because I hurt your feelings. This began before you hurt my feelings. When? Yesterday? When you were still calling it Daddy's Flower Castle. I was 6. You were 28. He almost laughed, but anger won. The dealer climbed down from his truck and waved uncertainly. Ruth waved back. Daniel lowered his voice. This isn't you. The words were meant as concern. They struck deeper than the accusation. What part? Ruth asked. Selling equipment? Reading estimates? Making a decision without a man beside me? Trying to restart a mill at 71? Melissa spoke quietly. Daniel? No, somebody has to say it. She can barely manage the place now. Ruth felt heat rise beneath her collar. What exactly have you managed here? I'm trying to manage the exit. For whom? His eyes sharpened. The dealer busied himself checking the hitch. Daniel took the tackle box from the boat. It looked too small in his hand. You think this proves you don't need anybody? He said. No, I've already asked 3 people for help. Who? People who listened to what I asked? He walked out of the barn. Melissa lingered. She ran one hand along the blue hull, leaving a clean stripe in the fine dust. He did love this boat, she said. So did Walter, from a climate-controlled distance. Melissa smiled sadly. Daniel's scared. He keeps sending women to explain that. I'm not explaining it. I'm warning you that scared men make expensive decisions. Ruth studied her. How expensive? From the drive came the slam of Daniel's truck door. Melissa looked toward the sound. Ask him about Route 9. Then she followed her husband. The dealer hitched the trailer and pulled the boat into the daylight. As it passed, Ruthless gleamed against the bare trees, absurdly clean and hopeful. Ruth expected grief to stop her. It did not. She watched until the trailer disappeared, then went into the house and wrote 3 checks. 1 to the electrician, 1 to the carpenter, and 1 for a new drive belt. On the memo line of the last, she wrote "not worthless" in block letters. She tore it up before mailing and wrote another. Harris would laugh, Lena would approve, and Walter would have said it made the accounts look emotional. Ruth put the proper check in its envelope. Then she called the contractor managing the Route 9 hotel renovation and asked when Daniel Mercer had last been on the job. The man who answered transferred her twice before a project supervisor named Owen came on the line. Mercer Contracting, he said. They haven't been on Route 9 since January. Ruth looked at the calendar above Walter's desk. Daniel had talked about the hotel 3 nights ago. Was the work finished? A pause followed, the kind businesses used when deciding how little they could safely say. Not by Mercer. What happened? You'd need to ask Daniel. I'm his bookkeeper. It was an old reflex and not quite a lie. Ruth had prepared his quarterly taxes until the previous year, when Daniel said new software made her system unnecessary. Owen's voice loosened. The bid was tight from the start. Then they opened the east wing walls and found water damage. Change orders got ugly. The owner disputed 2 invoices. Daniel pulled his crew. Did he get paid? not everything he billed. How long ago? Final meeting was January 26th. Ruth thanked him and hung up. The date sat heavily in her mind. On January 26th, Daniel had taken her to dinner because it would have been Walter's 74th birthday. He had ordered steak, teased Ruth for asking the price of the specials, and paid the check before she could reach it. When she asked about Route 9, he said they were finally making progress. The phone rang before Ruth could decide whether to call him. "Why are you contacting my clients?" Daniel asked. "Owen called you. Within 30 seconds. What were you thinking?" "That I wanted an answer." "So, you pretended to be my bookkeeper?" "I said I was your bookkeeper. I was for 11 years. You aren't now." "No, now you have software." He made a frustrated sound. "This is my business, and the mill is mine. That doesn't give you the right to interfere with my work. Bringing a broker into my building doesn't give you the right to call what I do interference." Silence sharpened the line. Ruth sat at her desk. The 3 repair checks lay sealed in front of her. "Did Route 9 bankrupt you?" she asked. "No." "Did you lose money?" "It was a bad contract." "How much?" "I am not discussing this with you." "Then stop spending my property in your head. I did not ask you for money. You brought me an estimate with enough left over to buy an apartment. I was trying to show you the possibilities." "For whom?" Daniel breathed into the phone. In the background, Ruth heard a truck door shut and a power saw whine to life. "I have 2 crews that need steady jobs," he said. "I've carried payroll through 3 delayed payments. The hotel owner owes me money. That does not mean I plan to take yours. You told a broker the family was preparing to sell. Because I thought once you saw the numbers, you'd make a sensible choice. And then? And then what? If I bought the apartment and had money left, were you going to ask?" His answer took too long. "It would have been a loan," he said. Ruth closed her eyes. There was the difference between Daniel and Walter. Walter would have asked first and arranged the facts around the answer. Daniel arranged the facts first, so asking would feel unnecessary. "How much?" she said. "I'm handling it." "How much did you imagine borrowing?" "I said I'm handling it. You imagined it before I knew there was a buyer." "Mom, you had a use for money I hadn't agreed to make. I thought my parents' property might help their family instead of rotting beside a creek." The sentence struck, and this time Daniel did not apologize. Ruth looked through the office window. The mill roof rose beyond the budding maples. "You should tell your wife the number," she said. "Melissa knows. She knows you're scared. That isn't a number. You sold Dad's boat to pay for a drive belt. Don't give me advice about money." He hung up. Ruth kept the receiver against her ear until the empty line tone began. Then she placed it in the cradle and mailed the checks. Work altered the mill by inches. The carpenter braced the timber beneath the east stones with new oak posts that stood out almost offensively pale against the old wood. The electrician removed a nest of brittle wire and installed emergency shutoffs in red boxes. Harris rejected the first belt because its lacing sat crooked. The supplier took it back after a discussion in which Ruth used no profanity but caused the man to apologize 3 times. Leon Pike refused to travel from North Carolina. Then he called at 7 the next morning to ask what kind of stones they had. "French burr, 48 inches, Ruth said. "Whose dress?" "Walter's, last time." Leon snorted. "That man left lands too wide." "You told him that. He told me you told him different." "I did." A pause. "Smart woman," Leon said. "Send photographs." He examined 18 close pictures by mail because he refused email, then agreed to advise Harris over the telephone for a fee. Harris called it extortion and paid half before Ruth could stop him. They removed the runner stone with the old crane after the carpenter reinforced the overhead beam. Its surface showed glazed channels, worn furrows, and one chipped edge that Leon declared ugly but survivable. Harris could no longer hold the mill bill steadily enough for long work. Ruth learned to position it while he read the stone, marking high places in chalk. The first tap rang through her wrist. "Angle," Harris said. "I know. You know in theory. The stone doesn't care. The stone cares very much." By the end of 20 minutes, Ruth's shoulder burned. Harris's right hand had swollen around the knuckles. They stopped, though both pretended the decision belonged to the other. It took 6 mornings to dress enough of the surface for a test grind. Leon insulted their photographs, their chalk marks, and once their ancestors. On the final call, he grunted. "That'll make flour," he said. Whether anybody eats it is between you and God. The new belt arrived straight, the guards fit. The line shaft turned by hand through a complete rotation without binding. Only water remained. Harris chose a Thursday morning, when the creek ran low and clear. He brought chest waders, 2 pike poles, a life vest, and enough rope to restrain a parade. "We clear the intake first," he said. Ruth pulled the waders over her clothes. "I remember. We work from the bank. Nobody enters moving water. I remember that too. You remember many things and obey very few." The white lawn chair had shifted but remained trapped across the grate. Harris secured a rope around Ruth's waist and tied the other end to an elm. He wore the second line. Together, they worked branches from the channel, stacking them on the bank. The chair came free with a sucking rush. One leg was missing, and a dead fish had lodged in the seat. "Still more useful than some furniture I've owned," Harris said. When the grate was clear, they walked the channel edge twice, checking for loose debris. Harris inspected the turbine bearing again. Ruth tested the gate wheel. At 11:12, they stood in the machinery room beside the emergency shutoff. 10 seconds, Harris said. "You open a quarter turn. I watch the lower bearing. If I yell, you close. What if I can't hear you? You'll hear me." Ruth went to the gatehouse. The handwheel resisted, then moved. Below the grate, water hissed into the intake. She opened the gate 1/4 turn and ran back along the path. By the time she entered the mill, the vertical shaft was moving. Slowly at first. A pulley turned overhead, lifting the long belt out of its sag. The second pulley answered. Then the line began to roll with a low, rhythmic thump that traveled through the floor. The east stone gearing engaged. Ruth stood beneath it, every sense pulled tight. For 17 years, the mill had contained the shape of work without the work itself. Now, belts flickered through the air. Wood knocked against wood. The building seemed to draw one enormous breath. Harris shouted from below. "Bearing's cool!" Ruth laughed. The sound vanished into the machinery. Then something struck the intake. The shaft jerked. The drive belt snapped sideways against its guard. A grinding shudder passed through the floor. "Close it!" Harris roared. Ruth ran. At the gatehouse, the handwheel fought her. She put both hands on it and hauled. The screw turned once, twice. The machinery noise faded, but the water continued hissing. The gate stopped 3 inches above closed. "Harris!" He reached the gatehouse breathless. One look through the grate wiped the color from his face. A branch thicker than Ruth's arm had wedged beneath the lower gate edge. Water poured around it into the intake. "We need the bypass open," he said. "Then we pull it from downstream." They opened the diversion channel and waited for the pressure to ease. The creek level dropped only inches. "I'll go," Ruth said. "No, I can fit between the retaining wall and grate. No one needs to fit anywhere. We use the pole." The pole could not reach the branch at the correct angle. Harris tried until his hands shook. Ruth tied a second safety line around her chest. "You said nobody enters moving water," he said. "The diversion is open. It's still moving. So am I." He caught her arm. This is the part Walter was afraid of. Ruth looked at his swollen fingers gripping her sleeve. "Then hold the rope." The water came above her knees and stole her breath through the waders. She moved sideways along the stone wall, boots searching for the submerged ledge. Harris kept the line taut. The branch had forked around an iron brace. Ruth hooked one end and pulled. It did not move. "Leave it," Harris called. She changed her angle. The branch shifted suddenly. Water punched through the gap. Ruth's right boot slipped from the ledge, and her hip struck the stone wall hard enough to whiten her vision. The safety line snapped tight. Harris hauled while she found her footing. Together, they dragged the branch clear. Ruth climbed onto the bank on both knees, soaked above one glove and shaking with cold. Harris shut the gate. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he crouched in front of her. "Can you stand?" "Probably. That is not an answer. It's the one I have." He helped her up. Pain spread from her hip down her thigh, deep and hot beneath the cold. Inside the mill, the belts hung still again. Harris wrapped Ruth in an old wool blanket from his truck and made her sit on the loading dock while he checked the turbine. She held a cup of coffee between both hands, but could not stop trembling. "We had 8 seconds, she said. "Maybe 9. The line turned. The intake failed. The bearing stayed cool. You hit a wall. The wheel worked." Harris sat beside her, leaving room between their shoulders. "For 9 seconds, he said. Ruth looked through the open doors at the machinery, waiting in the gray light. Then we know which 10 seconds to earn next. Harris drove her to urgent care in Ruth's own Buick because she refused to leave it at the mill. "You are wearing wet pants under a horse blanket," he said. "This is not the moment to worry about parking. It'll be dark before they release me. You've diagnosed yourself now? I know waiting rooms." He kept both hands high on the steering wheel and drove 10 miles under the speed limit. Ruth shivered beside him. At every curve, pain pressed deeper into her hip. The clinic found no broken bones. A nurse with purple glasses instructed Ruth to use ice, take acetaminophen, and return if she developed numbness, dizziness, or worsening pain. Harris listened as if he intended to administer an examination later. By the time they reached her house, the bruise had spread from her hip toward her back in a hard purple fan. Harris carried her wet clothes to the laundry room while Ruth changed. When she came into the kitchen in flannel pants and Walter's old robe, Harris was standing at the stove opening a can of chicken soup. "That's condensed," she said. "I can read. You have to add water. I was getting there. The measuring cup is—" "Sit down. I live here. Then you know where the chairs are." Ruth sat because the room tilted slightly when she turned too fast. Harris added water without measuring and poured the soup into 2 bowls. He had brought crackers from his truck, loose in a sleeve with a rubber band around one end. "How old are those?" Ruth asked. "You're very critical of emergency provisions. One has a tire mark, adds texture." They ate at the kitchen table. The soup was too thin. Ruth wanted salt, but did not want to stand, and asking Harris would make the meal feel more intimate than she could manage. He broke a cracker in half. "The intake needs a debris rack upstream of the gate." "I know. And a shutoff release we can reach without running 30 yards. The gatehouse has worked since 1912. The gatehouse nearly drowned you in 2026. I did not nearly drown. You fell in moving water. It came to my waist. You are 5'3". That leaves very little Ruth above the floodline." She almost smiled. Harris did not. "I'm serious, so am I. We'll fabricate a rack. We'll hire somebody to fabricate it. I can call Curtis. I already did." Ruth set down her spoon. "When?" "While you were getting x-rayed. You ordered work on my mill?" "I asked for an estimate." "That sounds familiar." Harris stared at her. The comparison had been unfair, and both of them knew it. Ruth looked at her soup. "I'm sorry. You should be. I said it. I heard it. I'm enjoying the weather." She waited for him to soften. He did not. "You don't get to arrange things because you think I'll say no," she said. "And you don't get to treat needing help as a clerical error. I asked you for help. You asked me to repair a machine. That's not the same as letting me help you. I let you drive. You were wrapped in horse bedding. It was a wool blanket. Ruth." The way he said her name made the kitchen smaller. She pushed the bowl away. "You can leave the estimate on the table when it comes." Harris sat very still. Then he stood, carried both bowls to the sink, and turned off the stove. "You're right," he said. "It's your mill. That's not what I— Call me when you want my help, instead of my obedience." He left through the back door without taking his crackers. Ruth remained at the table until the Buick's engine faded down the road. The house settled around her. Water ticked through the kitchen pipes. Walter's robe smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. On the counter, Harris had placed the clinic papers, her keys, 2 acetaminophen tablets, and a glass of water. She swallowed the tablets angrily. The next morning, Lena arrived carrying a paper bag of ice and a loaf of bread. "Harris called me," she said. "Of course he did. He said you might murder him. He survived. Disappointing. I brought sourdough for the wake." Lena put the ice in the freezer, cut 2 slices of bread, and inspected the bruise after extracting a promise that Ruth would not behave modestly. "That is magnificent," she said. "It looks like South America. It does not. Maybe Africa. Turn a little. I'm not a globe." Lena helped tape an ice pack against Ruth's hip, then made coffee strong enough to remove paint. She did not lecture. She talked about a customer who had returned a cinnamon roll because it contained cinnamon. Only as she buttoned her coat did she say, "You know, you don't have to prove you can do every dangerous thing yourself. I wasn't proving anything. That's usually when people prove the stupidest things." Ruth called Harris after lunch. "I want your help," she said when he answered. A pause. "With what?" "The debris rack, the remote shutoff, and telling me when I'm being reckless. That last one pays overtime. I also want you to stop making arrangements without me. Fair. And the soup needed salt." He hung up, but not before she heard him laugh. Curtis fabricated a steel rack that angled across the intake channel, allowing branches to ride upward instead of wedging against the gate. The remote shutoff was less elegant. A cable release ran from the machinery room to a weighted mechanism in the gatehouse. Pulling it dropped the head gate at once. Raising it still required the hand wheel. The work cost nearly twice the estimate. Ruth wrote the check while sitting on a cushion Lena had brought for her office chair. Her bruise faded through shades of green and yellow. Every evening, the ache reminded her that 9 seconds of moving machinery had already consumed money, sleep, and skin. May delivered the grain herself. "You said I haul it," Ruth told her. "You said you'd arrange it. You failed. I can pay delivery." I added it to the invoice. May opened the back of her truck. 6 sacks stood on a clean pallet, 4 buckwheat, 2 rye, each marked with variety, harvest date, lot, and moisture percentage. I only asked for 1 test load. This is 1 test load. It's 600 pounds. You can't judge a mill on a grocery bag. Ruth looked at the invoice. Your price changed. You wanted cleaned grain. Cleaning costs money. It was supposed to be cleaned before. It was. Now it's cleaner. May's expression did not move. Ruth saw the challenge and beneath it, a willingness neither of them intended to name. She paid the invoice. May helped move the sacks into the loading room, refusing Harris's hand truck until the second bag reminded her she possessed a spine. They stacked the grain on new pallets away from the stone wall. "The first batch is rye," Ruth said. "I'm staying. It may take hours." "I brought lunch." May held up a paper sack identical to Harris's. She had packed 2 sandwiches, an apple, and a thermos. Harris arrived carrying his tools and did not mention that Ruth was already at work when he had ordered her to wait. Lena came at noon, after her morning baking, with a digital scale and 3 empty containers. The machinery room felt crowded with expectation. Ruth checked the grain chute. Harris checked the bearing. May opened the first rye sack and ran a hand through the kernels. Lena sniffed them. "Smells good." "It better," May said. "I charged enough, not according to Ruth's face." That's her face when anything costs more than 1978. Ruth ignored them and walked the line once more. At the gatehouse, she raised the head gate a quarter turn. Water entered the turbine with a low rush. The shaft began moving. This time, nothing struck the intake. Ruth returned to the machinery room. Harris stood beside the remote shutoff, one hand near the red handle. The pulleys gathered speed. The new belt traveled cleanly through the guard. The east stones engaged with a deep hum. May stopped joking. Ruth fed a small measure of rye into the hopper. Kernels rattled down the chute toward the stones. The sound changed as the grain entered, a steady grinding murmur Ruth had not heard since Daniel still had dark hair. Flour began to sift into the collection bin. The first handful was gray-brown and warm. Ruth rubbed it between her fingers. Too coarse. She adjusted the tentering screw, narrowing the space between the stones. "Slow," Harris warned. "I know." The next flour came finer. Lena held out her palm. Ruth poured a little into it. The bakery owner rubbed it with her thumb, smelled it, and said nothing. They ran 10 pounds. A faint squeal rose overhead. Harris touched the lower bearing. "Cool." Ruth looked at the drive belt. One edge had begun to shine. "Belt's tracking left," she said. Harris adjusted the idler. The belt centered, then drifted again. The smell came next. Hot leather, then something sharper. "Shut it down," Lena said. "We have 5 pounds left," Ruth answered. "Shut it down." Harris pulled the release. The head gate dropped. The line slowed. The stones settled into silence. Smoke did not fill the room. Nothing dramatic broke. A thin brown streak marked the edge of the belt where it had rubbed the guard. That was all. Lena carried the flour to the window and opened one container. She sifted a pinch, tasted it, then spat delicately into a paper towel. "The bran is too coarse," she said, "and it smells like a burned shoe." "The grain is fine," May said. "I know." "The belt never touched the flour," Ruth said. "The flour absorbs the room. That smell will be in every loaf. We can air it. You can air the mill. You can't unsmoke flour." Lena sealed the container and pushed it toward Ruth. "I can't use this." The words were quiet, almost apologetic. That made them worse. Ruth looked at the warm flour coating her fingers. She had expected failure to arrive as a broken gear, a screaming bearing, or water bursting where it should not. She had not expected it to fit neatly inside a baker's palm. "How close?" she asked. Lena glanced toward the scorched belt, then at the course meal in the bin. Close enough to be expensive, she said, not close enough to eat. May was the first to move. She scooped flour from the bin into a paper sack, folded the top twice, and wrote "failed test" across it with Ruth's pencil. "What are you doing?" Ruth asked. "Keeping the evidence." "Evidence of what?" "That my grain wasn't the problem." Lena closed her eyes. "May, I have spent 20 years listening to people blame seed, soil, rain, storage, trucks, and once the phase of the moon, because they didn't want to say their machine was dirty. I said the grain was fine. You're a baker. You can change your mind when she feeds you lunch." Ruth took the sack from May and wrote beneath her words, "Grain clean, grind coarse. Belt rubbed at 12:43. May read it. "That'll do," she said. Harris had already removed the belt guard. He touched the polished edge with one finger, then sighted down the pulley line. "Idler brackets flexing under load," he said. "It didn't flex by hand," Ruth replied. "We didn't put 500 pounds of stone on it by hand. Can it be reinforced?" "Probably." "Today?" "No." The word landed harder than Lena's rejection. Harris stood and wiped his hands. "My knuckles are done. Curtis can weld a brace tomorrow. I can remove the bracket." "No, you don't need your knuckles to supervise. I need them to drive home." Ruth looked at the flour in the collection bin. Warmth still rose from it, carrying the unpleasant smell of scorched leather. "We have grain opened," she said. May folded the rye sack closed. "It'll keep. The stones are dressed. They'll remain rocks overnight." We were close. Lena took off the apron she had worn over her clothes. "Close flour is animal feed. I understand that." "Then stop looking at me as if I rejected your firstborn." Ruth's head came up. "Bad choice of metaphor," Lena said. "My point is, this is what a test is for. I know what a test is for." "Do you?" "Because your face is trying to renegotiate reality." May snorted. Ruth picked up the broom and began sweeping spilled grain from beneath the hopper. Harris took the broom from her. "I can sweep." "So can I. It's my mill." That sentence is becoming a rash. Ruth released the handle. For a moment, nobody spoke. The mill's silence felt newly earned, as if the building had worked just long enough to become disappointed with them. Lena stacked her containers. "Call me when the room no longer smells like a boot factory." "What happens to this flour?" Ruth asked. "I'll take 5 pounds and try crackers. No promises." "You said you couldn't use it. I can't sell bread made from it. I can waste 5 pounds in my own oven if that helps you stop glaring." "It doesn't." "Good. I hate sentimental baking." May carried the remaining rye to the loading room. Harris swept. Lena took her 5 pounds. Ruth stood in the center of the machinery room with nothing useful to do. Walter had hated that more than failure. After a breakdown, he needed motion around him. He sent people for tools already in his pocket, ordered calls to men he had not paid, and removed parts before identifying the problem. Ruth had spent years following behind, labeling bolts and slowing disaster into inconvenience. She put the broom back on its hook. "We'll stop," she said. Harris glanced at her. "For today," she added. "Miracles are usually smaller than advertised," he said. Curtis reinforced the idler bracket the next afternoon. The repair took 40 minutes. His invoice charged for 2 hours because he had driven from Bellwether and missed another job. Ruth paid it without comment, which made him examine the check as if something might be wrong with it. The mill aired for 3 days. Ruth wiped every exposed surface near the stones, replaced the scorched belt section, and opened the loading doors whenever the weather stayed dry. She did not run the turbine. On the 3rd evening, Lena called. "The crackers are terrible," she said. "How terrible?" "They could remove wallpaper." "So, the grind?" "The grind is too uneven, fine flour mixed with chunks of bran. But the rye tastes good after the burned smell bakes off. That's something. It is not a product." "I said something, not a product." A pause followed. "Dempsey came by," Lena said. Ruth set down her pen. "About the lease?" "He brought a man who kept measuring the front windows." "What for?" "Mirrors, apparently. The fitness people want a room full of mirrors so customers can watch themselves suffer." "Did Dempsey give you notice?" "No. He gave me an opportunity to leave early without penalty. That means he has another tenant. It means he'd prefer one." "What did you say?" "I told him my rolling pin weighs 4 pounds. Ruth could hear the mixer running in the background. Lena usually finished production before noon. If she was baking again after 6, the morning had gone badly, or she was trying to outrun a thought. "Bring the lease tomorrow," Ruth said. "You aren't my bookkeeper anymore. I'm aware. I can pay you. You bought 5 pounds of bad flour. I took 5 pounds of bad flour. Then we're even." They met at the bakery after closing. Lena locked the front door, turned the sign to closed, and spread the lease across a flour-dusted table. Ruth read every paragraph, while Lena cleaned an espresso machine that did not need cleaning. The landlord could not force her out before the term ended. He could raise the rent at renewal. He could also restrict renovations, withhold approval for subletting, and charge Lena for restoring alterations she had made with written permission from the previous owner. "He wants the ovens," Ruth said. "He wants me to leave the gas line and hood. The fitness studio wants a smoothie counter. Of course it does. Pain requires beverages." Ruth read the proposed renewal again. The increase was 87%. "What can you afford?" she asked. Lena named a number barely above her current rent. "At that rate, Dempsey won't keep you. I noticed." "Could you reduce your space?" "I need production, storage, and a counter. I could close the retail side and wholesale only, but then I lose half my margin." "What about production somewhere else and a smaller counter? 2 rents, 2 utility bills, 2 chances for a landlord to discover capitalism." Ruth looked around the kitchen. The mixer occupied 8 square feet. The deck oven required more. Racks, tables, refrigeration, sinks, dry storage. She mentally placed each object in the mill's loading room, then rejected the arrangement because the door to the machinery floor violated separation requirements. The old office beside the loading dock had plumbing on the far wall. The workshop service could perhaps be extended. A vent hood could run through the exterior rather than the roof. "What?" Lena asked. "Nothing. That is the face you make before something becomes expensive. The loading room at the mill is 32 by 40. Lena stopped wiping the espresso machine. "It has a separate exterior entrance," Ruth continued. "There's an office attached. Water runs to the old wash sink." "No. I haven't proposed anything. You moved my mixer in your head. It fit." "Ruth." "The floor would need resurfacing. Plumbing upgraded, a proper partition from the mill, ventilation, electrical service, inspection." I said no. "Why?" "Because I rejected your flour, and now you're trying to house me. This has nothing to do with the flour. It has everything to do with it. You need a baker. I need a building. That is how people end up making terrible decisions while calling them fate. I don't believe in fate. You believe in ledgers. More dangerous." Ruth folded the lease. "You asked what I thought. I asked about this lease. This lease says you need another place, and your loading room is currently full of grain, old pallets, and a dead refrigerator containing something Harris refuses to identify. The refrigerator can go. So can I. Home." Lena snatched the lease from the table. Ruth did not follow her. She walked to the front window and looked at the dark storefront reflected in the glass. 6 wooden tables, mismatched chairs, the long pastry case Walter used to lean against, while claiming he was only there for coffee. Lena's regulars would miss this place. So would Lena, though she would rather burn the curtains than say so. "You'd have a lease," Ruth said. Lena stopped at the kitchen door. "A real one," Ruth continued. "Not a favor. Not free rent in exchange for helping me. Your own production room, your own locks, defined utilities, defined improvements. If we can make the numbers work, you and I separately, with separate numbers. You don't even know what renovations cost. No. You don't know whether zoning allows it. No. You don't know whether your flour will ever be fit for bread. That is irrelevant to the lease." Lena turned. "You expect me to believe that? I expect you to pay rent. Whether you buy flour from me is your decision." A reluctant interest appeared in Lena's face and was immediately concealed. "How much rent?" "I don't know yet. Convenient. I won't invent a number to make you comfortable." "Also convenient." Ruth handed her a blank sheet from the bakery's invoice pad. "Write down exactly what your production room requires. Not what you want, what it requires." Lena did not take the paper. "Tomorrow," Ruth said, "the mill gets a second test. Come or don't. Afterward, you can look at the loading room as a possible tenant, not as my baker. You are remarkably bossy for a potential landlord. I learned from Dempsey." Lena finally took the sheet. The next morning, Ruth opened the head gate while Harris watched the reinforced bracket. The turbine gathered the creak into itself. The iron shaft turned. The belt tracked through the center of the guard without touching either edge. Rye entered the stones. This time, the flour fell evenly. cool enough to hold, and fine enough that the brand no longer scratched Ruth's palm. Lena arrived after the first 10 pounds. She said nothing as she took a sample, smelled it, and rubbed it between her fingers. May stood beside the hopper, arms crossed. Harris watched the bearing thermometer. "Well?" Ruth asked. Lena tasted the flour. "It's not terrible," she said. From Lena, it was nearly a hymn. She carried the sample toward the loading room, opened the door, and stood among the grain sacks and abandoned equipment. Her gaze traveled from the concrete floor to the water line, then up the exterior wall. Ruth did not follow. After a while, Lena called through the doorway. "That refrigerator leaves before I measure anything." Harris leaned close to Ruth. "We should open it first." "No," Ruth said. For once, everyone agreed. The refrigerator left on a hand truck with its doors taped shut and no investigation of its contents. Curtis accepted $20 to haul it to the transfer station and another $10 never to describe the smell. Lena measured the room. She measured walls, doorways, ceiling height, drain distance, and the width of the loading dock. Then she measured everything again because, according to her, buildings lied after lunch. Ruth followed with a notebook. "I need 3-compartment washing, hand washing, and a mop sink," Lena said. "There's 1 sink. There are 4 varieties of sink because health departments enjoy taxonomy. Add them. Hot water. Obviously. Floor drains. Possibly, not possibly. Write necessary beside it. I have. You underlined it 3 times. It was necessary every time. The electrician said the new workshop service could support the bakery if they added a separate panel. The plumber found the drain line usable, but objected to its age with personal intensity. A contractor Lena trusted estimated the partition, washable wall surfaces, food-safe flooring, and ventilation. The total silenced both women. "That is too much," Lena said. "It's less than moving into another retail space. It's also a loading room beside a machine that tried to smoke my rye. It stopped smoking. Excellent brochure language." They spent 3 evenings separating what Lena required from what she could bring herself. She owned the mixer, deck oven, tables, racks, and refrigeration. Ruth would pay for fixed improvements that stayed with the building: electrical service, plumbing, wall, floor, and exterior vent. Lena would pay for moving equipment and bakery-specific connections. When Ruth proposed rent, Lena stared at her over the kitchen table. "That's low. It covers the renovation loan over 5 years, plus utilities and insurance. What does it pay you?" "After 5 years, rent. That isn't what I asked. It pays the mill by giving it regular income. You are allowed to earn money. I intend to. Then charge market rate." "You cannot pay market rate." Lena leaned back. "I dislike being accurately poor. It's not charity if the numbers work for both of us. It is if you hide your labor again." Ruth added a management amount to the monthly rent. Lena reduced it. They argued for 20 minutes and settled between the figures. Harris, who had been eating pie at the far end of the table and pretending not to listen, raised his fork. "I would like to rent a corner for half that." "You already leave tools here for free," Ruth said. "That's different." "I don't have a sink taxonomy." Lena signed a letter of intent contingent on building approval and a successful commercial bake with Mercer flour. Then she wrote Ruth a check for a deposit. Ruth held it longer than necessary. "What?" Lena asked. "Nothing. You look like somebody proposed marriage. I had better offers." Recently, Harris choked on his pie. The first successful rye test produced 37 loaves. Lena mixed the dough at her current bakery, while Ruth sat near the oven and tried not to ask questions. May arrived halfway through bulk fermentation, carrying a jar of mustard and 4 kinds of opinion. The dough rose evenly. It held water without turning gummy. The baked loaves had dark crusts, close crumbs, and a warm grain smell that pushed the last trace of scorched belt from Ruth's memory. Lena cut one while it was still too hot. May spread mustard on her slice. "You carry mustard to bakeries?" Ruth asked. "I've been disappointed before." Lena chewed slowly. "The flour needs to be a little finer." Ruth's heart sank. "But I can use it," Lena added. May took another slice. "Then say that first." "I enjoy suspense." The 37 loaves sold by early afternoon. Lena wrote Mercer rye on a small card in the pastry case without asking. Several customers remembered the mill. One remembered Walter's cornmeal and told Ruth it had always contained too much hull. Ruth thanked him for the information. She returned to the mill with 2 empty flour containers, Lena's first payment, and enough optimism to make her suspicious. The phone rang in the office while she entered the sale in the ledger. "Mrs. Mercer?" a man asked. "This is Glenn Foster with Mid-State Building Supply." Ruth knew the company. Daniel had bought lumber and drywall there for years. "What can I do for you?" "I'm trying to reach Daniel regarding his account. He listed you as a family reference. He has my number." "Yes, ma'am, we've spoken. I'm calling because there seems to be some uncertainty about the Mercer property disposition." Ruth's pen stopped. "What uncertainty?" Daniel indicated there was a pending sale of a family commercial property. "Our credit manager needs clarification before extending his payment arrangement. There is no pending sale." The man became quiet. "Did Daniel say there was?" Ruth asked. "He said the property was being prepared for market." "It is not." "I understand." "No, Mr. Foster. I need to know what he told you. I can't discuss details of an account you're not party to." "You called me." "Because he named the potential sale as a source of funds and identified you as the owner. We were hoping you might confirm timing. If the sale is no longer anticipated, I'll note that." "How much does he owe?" "I'm not authorized to disclose that." "Does he owe more than $30,000? Another careful silence. Ruth knew enough. Glenn cleared his throat. "There is an option for a personal guarantor if the account holder wants to maintain current terms. I can send the form." "No, I'm not asking you to decide now." "I have decided." After the call, Ruth sat alone beside the warm machinery room wall. The mill was not running, but the last grind seemed to remain in the boards as a faint vibration. She called Daniel and told him to come. He arrived after 6. Melissa drove separately and parked behind him, though Ruth had not invited her. Daniel entered the office without taking off his coat. "You spoke to Mid-State," he said. "They spoke to me. I told them not to call you. You gave them my name. Months ago, as a reference. Before any of this. What did you tell them about selling the mill, that it was a possibility?" "You told them it was being prepared for market." "It was. By whom?" He looked toward the office door. Melissa stood there with her arms folded, listening. "Nothing was signed," Daniel said. "I never said it was guaranteed. You used my property to make your debt look temporary. It is temporary." "How much?" He did not answer. Melissa did. $94,000. Ruth's hand tightened on the desk edge. Daniel turned. "That includes disputed charges." "It includes everything Mid-State says is due," Melissa replied. "There are other accounts. Those are current." "Some are." Ruth looked at her son. "How much altogether?" "Mom, this is not your problem. You brought it into my mill with a broker. I was trying to solve it before it became anyone's problem. With my money, with a loan. If you sold and if you had enough left after buying a place, I was going to ask for a loan. You told the creditor about the sale before you asked me, because they needed a plan. So did I." Daniel paced once across the office. He stopped at Walter's desk and put both hands on it. "I have 11 people depending on me? All adults?" He stared at her. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind that asks whether they can make decisions with accurate information. They need paychecks. My suppliers need payment. My clients need jobs finished. This is what running a business looks like. So is knowing what money belongs to you. I know that. Do you?" He turned away. Melissa entered the office fully and closed the door behind her. Mid-State offered to extend terms if someone guarantees half the balance. "No," Ruth said. Daniel's head came around. "I didn't ask." "You were going to. I came because you ordered me here. I am not guaranteeing any part of your debt. I heard you. I am not lending you the renovation money. I am not selling the mill to rescue your company." His face hardened. "But you'll spend it building a kitchen for Lena. She will pay rent. She'll pay enough to cover what you spent? Every dollar? Yes, over time. So would I. You already borrowed my sale before I agreed to have one." Daniel's hand struck the desk. Not a blow exactly, but hard enough to rattle the drawer. Melissa flinched. Ruth did not. "You think I wanted this?" he asked. "You think I enjoyed walking around that ruin with a broker while Dad's jacket was still hanging there? You did it anyway. I am trying to keep my company alive, and I am trying to keep my life mine. This isn't a life. It's a building. It is timber and stone and a wheel that ran long enough to bruise you. You heard about that?" Harris called Melissa because he was worried, like people do when they care about someone. Ruth glanced at Melissa. She looked tired rather than guilty. Daniel continued. "You're risking everything to prove Dad overlooked you. The accuracy was crueler than a lie. Ruth felt the room go very quiet. Maybe he did, she said. So punish him. He's dead, but find a way. Don't punish me. You called it worthless before I had done anything. Because it is. Then why is it your way out? Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came. Melissa moved toward the filing cabinet, perhaps only to put distance between herself and him. Her gaze fell on the open ledger Ruth had used for flour sales. Beneath it lay the older mill accounts Ruth had consulted while pricing the lease. "This is Walter's handwriting?" Melissa asked. "The blue ink is his. And the black. Mine." Melissa turned a page. "Daniel Mercer, tuition balance." Daniel looked over. "What?" Ruth's stomach tightened. Melissa read the entry silently, then the next. The payment source was written in Ruth's careful hand. "County bookkeeping wages." "Close that," Daniel said. Melissa did not. She turned another page. There were the truck down payment, the medical deductible after Daniel's knee surgery at 27, the payroll loan Ruth had made during his first year in business. Walter's name appeared beside each in the notes because he had delivered the checks. Ruth's outside wages appeared in the credit column because she had earned the money. "Your father said he arranged these," Melissa said. "He did," Daniel replied. Ruth spoke before the old habit could silence her. "I paid them." Daniel looked at her. "Not all," she said. "Most. Why didn't you ever tell me? I thought keeping track was enough." "For who?" The question had no safe answer. Ruth closed the ledger. "I'm not using it against you," she said. "You just did." "No, I'm finally refusing to do it again." Daniel's eyes shone with anger or shame. Ruth could not tell which. "You're choosing a machine over your son." She stood slowly. "No," she said. "I'm choosing not to be dismantled for parts." He left without another word. Melissa remained by the filing cabinet. Outside, Daniel's truck started and pulled away. "He'll expect me to follow," she said. "Will you? Eventually?" She rested her hand on the closed ledger. "But not until I know what else we've been calling his money." Melissa pulled out the chair beside Ruth's desk and sat without removing her coat. "I need to see the business loans," she said. "I don't have Daniel's current books. I mean the old ones. The money from you and Walter." "Why?" "Because every time I ask him how Mercer Contracting survived the first 5 years, he says his father believed in him. He did. That isn't the same as paying for it." Ruth looked at the filing cabinet. She had kept tax returns, canceled checks, and mill records because paper-settled arguments, numbers, could not. Walter used to accuse her of saving receipts until they became historical documents. "Some were gifts," she said. "Some were loans he repaid. I'm not trying to collect." "What are you trying to do?" Melissa stared through the office window toward the mill floor. "Find the edge of our own money." The sentence sounded practiced, as though she had been trying to say it for years. Ruth opened the cabinet. They worked until nearly 10. Melissa made a list on yellow paper. Ruth corrected dates, identified accounts, and refused to estimate when records did not support an answer. The total was neither devastating nor trivial. What unsettled Melissa was the pattern: a truck payment here, payroll there, tuition covered without discussion, insurance paid during a lean winter. None had ruined Ruth and Walter. Together, they formed a bridge Daniel had crossed without seeing who built it. "He paid back this one," Ruth said, pointing to a loan from his second year in business. "Early, with interest," Melissa marked it. "And this equipment note," Ruth continued. "Walter co-signed, but Daniel never missed a payment. He works hard." "Yes. I don't want you to think I've forgotten that." "I don't." Ruth had watched Daniel re-roof a church in August heat after 2 crewmen quit. She had seen him drive 60 miles on Christmas Eve to repair storm damage for a customer who could not pay until spring. Generosity came easily to him when it looked like work. What he could not bear was needing generosity himself. Melissa turned to the college ledger again. "Did Walter know these payments came from your wages?" "Of course. Why did he let Daniel think they came from him?" Ruth folded a canceled check along an old crease. "Because he handed them over. That's not an answer. It was enough of one at the time. For Walter." Ruth looked at her. Melissa's face softened. "I'm sorry. No, you're right." The admission left an unpleasant taste. Ruth gathered the records into orderly piles. "I made it easy," she said. "Walter liked being the person who solved things. I liked knowing the solving had actually been done. We both got what we wanted, except credit. I told myself credit was childish. And now? Now I think people are very careful about calling a thing childish when they'd rather you not ask for it. Melissa smiled, but her eyes remained tired. She left with copies of the documented loans Daniel had repaid and a list of those that had been gifts. Ruth kept the originals. At the back door, Melissa buttoned her coat. "I'm opening an account in my own name," she said. Ruth did not react. "My paycheck will go there until Daniel gives me the full business books. Household expenses stay shared. I'm not leaving him. I didn't ask. I know. Everybody else will. Everybody else can balance their own marriage." Melissa touched her arm. "He's going to blame the mill. He already does. He loves you. I know." Neither woman said that love had never prevented a Mercer man from building an argument that placed Ruth at the bottom. Construction began in the loading room the following Monday. Lena arrived with blue painter's tape and labeled the future location of every object. Mixer occupied one square. Oven occupied another. Rack parking appeared 4 times. A strip across the office door read, "Ruth not allowed to add storage here." Ruth moved it 2 inches lower. The partition wall separated the bakery from the machinery room. It included a locked fire door with a window, allowing Lena to see whether the mill was running without letting flour dust drift into her production space. New plumbing crossed the old office wall. The electrician added Lena's panel and meter. Ruth insisted on separate utility readings. Lena insisted on a clause requiring Ruth to give notice before entering, except in emergencies. They argued over what counted as an emergency. "Smoke," Ruth said. "Yes." "Water." "Yes." "Unusual machinery noise." "In my bakery?" "The rooms share a wall. If you hear machinery in my bakery, you may enter because the mill has achieved mobility." They signed the lease at Ruth's kitchen table with Harris and May as witnesses. Lena paid the first month and received 2 keys. She turned one over in her palm. "I thought I'd feel more triumphant." "You haven't moved the oven yet. I meant leaving Dempsey. You're not leaving a landlord. You're acquiring a different one. Thank you." That fixed it. May signed the witness line and pushed the paper toward Harris. "Make your X. My hand still works. Not according to your handwriting." Harris signed with elaborate care, producing something that resembled a fallen fence. The renovation exhausted more of the boat money than Ruth planned. Fixed costs remained even before the first full milling day. Lena's rent would steady the building, but flour sales at 25 pounds per test would not cover insurance, maintenance, and grain. May spread Ruth's figures across the loading dock one afternoon. "You need recurring orders," she said. "I know. Lena has customers. Lena has bread customers. People who buy $12 bread will buy flour if you put it in a small enough bag." "My bread is $8, Lena called from the loading room. "Give it time," May replied. Lena emerged carrying a tape measure. "I have 17 customers who asked whether they could buy the rye flour. 4 asked about buckwheat. 1 wants spelt because he enjoys paying more for vowels." "Retail bags require labels," Ruth said. "We can make labels. Different insurance. We can change insurance. Weight certification." May tapped the digital scale Lena had brought. "Certified last month." Ruth disliked ideas that arrived dressed as enthusiasm. She took the figures home and rebuilt them herself. A weekly grain club could work if members paid by the month, accepted limited varieties, and collected orders at Lena's bakery. The mill would run 1 day a week instead of attempting daily commercial production. May would know quantities before planning commitments. Lena could turn some grain into bread and sell the rest as flour. Harris could schedule maintenance without pretending his hands were younger than they were. The margins remained narrow. They also remained positive. Ruth drafted an order agreement containing enough conditions to discourage casual customers. Lena removed half the words. "You cannot make people initial beside moisture variation," she said. "They should understand. They are buying flour, not adopting a highway." May suggested 20 initial memberships. Lena collected 34 names in 3 days. Ruth accepted 24. "Why not 34?" Lena asked. "Because the mill has run successfully twice, 3 times. The first made roofing material, crackers." Those were not crackers. They agreed to 24 members, monthly prepayment, and 1 pickup day. It was not a revival of Mercer Mill. It was a small operation using 1 turbine, 1 pair of stones, and exactly as much grain as Ruth believed they could mill safely. The food inspector approved the bakery room after Lena added a splash guard beside the hand sink. The milling area required another round of cleaning, sealed storage bins, and documented pest control. Ruth hired a service rather than telling the inspector she could outthink a squirrel. Personal growth, Harris said. An invoice, she replied. May's concern was not squirrels. They were standing beside the grain pallets while Lena designed a simple handout for the grain club. At the top, she had written Mercer Mill, operating since 1912. No, May said. Lena looked up. It stopped operating. That's not the lie, I mean. Ruth knew before May touched the old machinery tour board hanging near the stairs. Walter had made it from varnished oak. Faded photographs showed the mill across 4 generations. Beneath one image of the damaged grain cleaner, Walter had typed, "Gear failure, 1987. Operator error led to major repairs." Calvin's name was absent, but anyone who had taken Walter's tour knew the story. "I forgot that was there," Ruth said. "I didn't," May replied. Lena set down her marker. Harris looked toward the workshop, giving Ruth the privacy of not leaving. Ruth lifted the tour board from its hooks. Dust outlined its shape on the wall. "I'll remove it. Then nobody sees the lie," May said. "That's not the same as correcting it." Ruth held the board against her chest. Walter's typewritten label lay beneath her hand. "What do you want me to write? I don't want to write your apology for you. I'm asking what would be accurate." May's face tightened. The gear was already cracked. Calvin didn't cause it. Walter knew and blamed him anyway. Walter may have convinced himself. "There she is," May said. Ruth stopped. The room felt suddenly close. The new bakery wall smelled of paint. Behind it, a plumber dropped something and swore. Ruth carried the board into the office. She found the maintenance ledger from 1987, the repair invoices, and Calvin's payroll entry. Then she called the 6 people still living who had been present the day the gear failed. 3 remembered, 2 had forgotten. One said Walter's version had always sounded wrong. Ruth typed a new card. In 1987, a previously damaged gear failed while Calvin Sutter was operating the grain cleaner. Walter Mercer blamed Mr. Sutter publicly and deducted losses from his wages. Mill maintenance records show the defect predated his employment. Calvin Sutter did not cause the failure. Ruth Mercer maintained those records and failed to correct the story at the time. She showed it to May. May read the last sentence twice. "You don't have to put yourself in it," she said. "Yes, I do. People will talk about Walter. They already did. He was usually present to improve the story." May's mouth moved, but she looked away before the smile formed. Ruth replaced the old label with the new card. She rehung the board beside the stairs, where grain club members, inspectors, contractors, and anyone entering the machinery room would see it. There was no audience, no speech. Curtis walked past carrying conduit and read it without comment. Harris stood before it later, with his cap in both hands. May remained after everyone left. "Calvin wouldn't have come back here," she said. "I know. He could hold a grudge longer than either of us. He learned from family." May nodded toward the board. "He would have read that 6 times and corrected your grammar. Is the grammar wrong? No. That would not have stopped him." They sat on the loading dock with 2 paper cups of coffee. May's shoulder touched Ruth's once when she shifted. Neither moved away. Inside, Harris tested the line shaft. Lena complained through the new wall that the machinery made her measuring cups tremble. Ruth listened to their voices crossing the building. For most of her life, belonging had sounded like being called from another room because someone needed something. This sounded different. Nobody was asking her to disappear into the need. A truck slowed on the county road. Ruth recognized Daniels before it reached the bridge. It did not turn into the drive. He continued past the mill, the engine fading beyond the trees. Harris appeared in the loading doorway. "We've got a vibration at the east pulley. How bad?" "Could be the belt settling. Could be the bearing mount." Ruth set down her coffee. May caught her sleeve. "Finish drinking it?" "The shaft will remain a shaft for 4 minutes." Harris leaned against the doorframe. "She's right." Ruth looked from one to the other. Then she picked up the cup and finished her coffee while it was still warm. The vibration came from a shim beneath the east pulley bearing. Harris found it after they stopped the line and removed the guard. One corner had worked loose enough to chatter under speed. "It needs replacing," he said. "Before the first club day?" Ruth asked. "Unless you want members receiving iron filings with their buckwheat." May looked into her coffee. "What would that do to the price?" Harris cut a new shim from brass stock, while Ruth held the work light. His hands cramped twice. Both times, he set down the snips without being told. Ruth did not offer to finish. She waited until he could continue, which required more restraint than doing it herself. The repaired bearing ran smoothly through a 30-minute test. Ruth still felt phantom vibrations for the rest of the evening. On the first production morning, she woke before the alarm and found rain tapping lightly against the bedroom window. She dressed in the dark, ate oatmeal standing at the kitchen counter, and crossed to the mill carrying the gate key and Walter's pocket notebook. Light already shone from Lena's new bakery windows. Inside, the loading room no longer resembled any part of the mill Ruth remembered. White washable panels covered the walls. Stainless steel tables reflected the overhead lights. The deck oven stood against the exterior wall beneath a new hood. Lena's mixer occupied the blue tape square with less than an inch to spare. Lena was shaping rye loaves. "You're late," she said. "It's 4:42. I've lived an entire life." Did it go well? Mostly dishes. The first grain club orders stood packed on a side table, brown paper bags with simple cream labels reading Mercer Mill Rye and Mercer Mill Buckwheat. Each carried the milling date, lot number, weight, and May's farm name. Ruth had rejected Lena's drawing of the decorative road wheel. "It's the wheel people recognize," Lena had argued. "It's the wheel that doesn't work. Customers enjoy pictures more than mechanical accuracy." The final label showed the mill's stone arch and creak instead. Harris arrived at 5 carrying a thermometer, tools, and a thermos of soup. "For breakfast?" Ruth asked. "For later?" Some of us plan beyond the next broken bearing. May backed her truck to the loading dock and came in complaining that the new exterior light illuminated every dent in her tailgate. They moved the morning's rye and buckwheat into position. There was no ribbon, no speech. Lena did not stop shaping dough when Ruth entered the machinery room. Ruth walked the line. The new shim sat tight. Guards were secured. Grain chutes were clean. Harris checked oil levels and bearing temperatures. May opened the first rye sack and entered its lot number in the production log. At 5:26, Ruth went upstream and raised the head gate. Water rushed into the iron turbine. The shaft began to turn below the mill floor. One pulley gathered the belt, then another. The east stones engaged, their deep hum steady beneath the faster clicking of the grain shoe. Ruth added the first measure of rye. Flour fell into the bin, cool and even. May fed grain. Harris listened beside the lower bearing. Lena opened the fire door long enough to shout, "Whatever you changed, my scale is vibrating again." "It's a mill," Harris called back. "It's my kitchen. It was a loading room 6 weeks ago, and you were more attractive 6 weeks ago. We all adapt." The door shut. Ruth tried not to laugh while adjusting the feed. They milled 80 pounds before 6:30. Harris rotated away from the bearing station when his back tightened. May took over the production log while Ruth sifted and checked weight. The work settled into rhythm. Not the old rhythm Walter's mill had processed hundreds of pounds before breakfast, but something smaller and more deliberate. A truck entered the gravel lot. Ruth felt it through the floor before she saw it. Daniel parked near the main doors. He remained inside for several seconds, windshield wipers crossing steadily. Then he came into the machinery room, carrying a manila envelope beneath his coat. He stopped just beyond the threshold. The moving belts drew his gaze upward. The line shaft turned above him. Behind the guard, the east pulley ran without wobble. Flour dust softened the light around May's shoulders as she fed the hopper. Daniel looked toward the decorative wheel visible through the front window, then toward the yellow door beside the bolting cabinet. "So you did it," he said. Ruth kept one hand on the feed control. "We're doing it." Harris nodded to Daniel without leaving the thermometer. May did not nod at all. "What's in the envelope?" Ruth asked. "I need 5 minutes. I'm milling. I can see that." "Then you can see why this is a bad time." He glanced around. "When is a good time?" "After 9. I have a meeting at 8. Tomorrow. My deadline is today." Ruth reduced the grain feed and signaled May. "Watch the hopper." May moved into place. I was already watching it. Ruth led Daniel into the office and left the door open so she could hear the machinery. He laid the envelope on her desk. "Mid-State will accept a 3-year repayment schedule," he said. "I've sold the second work van and a drywall lift. I let one crew go. The hotel claim is in mediation. That sounds like a plan. They require additional security." No, you haven't looked. I recognize paper. Daniel's expression tightened, but he did not raise his voice. I'm asking you to guarantee 40,000, not 94. It decreases every month as I pay. And if you cannot, they come after me first. And then me. I have receivables. Receivables did not pay mid-state. I have 2 contracts starting in May. It's March. I need to keep the account open until then. Ruth listened to the mill through the doorway. The East Stones held a clean, constant note. Where's Melissa? She asked. At work. Does she agree with this? She won't sign. That is not what I asked. She thinks I should close the company. Do you? No. The answer came quickly, but his face did not support it. Daniel pulled the form from the envelope. Figures filled the first page in his handwriting. He had made a real proposal this time. Interest, monthly payments, a reduced balance. He had also placed Ruth's house in a box labeled Guarantor Assets. She turned the page face down. I won't sign. I knew you'd say that before I came. Then why come? Because I wanted you to say it while looking at what I've done to fix this. I am looking. I sold equipment. I cut people who've worked for me for years. Melissa moved her paycheck into another account and changed the online banking password because she thinks I'm going to use our mortgage payment to buy lumber. Were you? Daniel looked toward the mill floor. Were you? Ruth repeated, not without replacing it. She sat back. I always replace it, he said. That's the part none of you see. Before someone notices, before it matters, it already matters. His hand flattened on the envelope. You risked your savings, sold Dad's boat, and put yourself in a creek for this place. But 40,000 for me is where you discover caution. This place has a tenant, prepaid orders, insurance, and a limit on what I will spend. Because you wrote the limit, yes, and you can change it, yes. But I can't. You changed yours before asking Melissa. He looked as if she had struck him. Ruth lowered her voice. I am not saying your business is worthless. I'm saying I cannot make myself responsible for keeping it alive. What's the difference? The difference is whether helping you costs me the right to decide what happens to my own home. The machinery note changed. It was slight, a dull pulse beneath the steady grinding. Once, twice, then again. Ruth stood. Daniel looked at her. I'm not finished. Neither is the bearing. She crossed the machinery room quickly, eyes moving from the belt to the shaft. Nothing visible had shifted. Harris stood near the lower bearing, watching the thermometer. You hear it? She asked. I feel something. May leaned away from the hopper. Feed steady. The pulse came again through the floor beneath Ruth's left shoe. Stop grain, she said. May closed the feed. Ruth did not wait for the squeal that might follow. She pulled the remote release. Upstream, the weighted mechanism dropped the head gate. The line began to slow. Lena opened the fire door. Why are we stopping? Vibration. I have 12 loaves waiting on flour. They can wait. Dough does not understand waiting. Then, explain it warmly. Harris crouched beside the east pulley support. Daniel stood in the office doorway, the guarantee papers still in one hand. As the shaft stopped, Ruth removed the guard only after securing the lockout. She touched the bearing mount. Cool. Harris checked the new shim. Tight. The pulse had come through the timber, not the metal. Ruth looked down. A pale oak brace beneath the stone floor showed a fresh dark line where it met the older beam. May, she said, step back from the hopper. May moved. Daniel came closer, his attention shifting from Ruth to the support. That post is walking, he said. Harris aimed the flashlight. 1/8 of an inch, maybe. Less, Ruth said. Daniel crouched without crossing the marked safety line. He studied the joint. The old beam's compressing around the plate, he said. Who braced it? Carson Woodworks. They used a flat plate against hand-hewn timber. It passed inspection. I didn't say it would fall. I said the load is biting unevenly. Harris looked at Ruth. That would send the pulse up through the floor. How do we fix it? She asked. Scribe saddle, Daniel said. Spread the load to the beam's shape. Oak, not steel. Can Carson do it? Anybody competent can do it. May folded her arms. That sounds like a man trying to invoice his mother. Daniel ignored her. Ruth looked at the waiting grain, the silent stones, and the club orders still unfilled. How long? If I had a dry oak block and the right tools, 2 hours. Do you? In my truck. Lena opened the fire door wider. I have perhaps 40 minutes before the Rido stages a rebellion. Daniel turned toward her. Who are you? Your mother's tenant. His face registered the word. Lena pointed at the dead machinery. Can you make that move without killing anybody? No, Ruth said. He can make the brace. Harris and I decide whether the mill moves. Daniel looked at her. The old response rose into his face. Offense at being corrected before other people. It passed. Fair, he said. He brought in tools and a squared piece of kiln-dried oak left from a church repair. Ruth watched him take measurements from the uneven beam with a compass. He transferred the shape to the block and cut slowly, testing the fit twice before removing more wood. His hands resembled Walter's around a chisel, larger, cleaner, but sure in the same way. Nobody mentioned the guarantee papers. The repair took an hour and 11 minutes. Harris approved the saddle. Ruth checked the lockout, replaced the guard, and sent everyone clear. She raised the gate. The iron wheel took the water. The line came alive again. The pulse did not return. Lena received her flour late and complained while carrying it away. May finished the grain log. Harris checked the brace every 10 minutes. Club members began arriving at 8, collecting bags through the bakery entrance while warm rye bread cooled on racks behind them. Daniel stood near the office, coat dusted with oak shavings. One customer thanked Ruth for bringing her husband's mill back. Ruth said, "It was mine too." The customer blinked, then nodded. Of course, Daniel heard. He walked to the tour board and read the new card about Calvin Sutter. His gaze stayed on Ruth's name in the final sentence. "You put yourself in it," he said. "I was in it." He looked toward May. She was weighing buckwheat at the far table and gave no sign. She listened. Daniel returned to the office, picked up the manila envelope, and slid the papers inside. "I don't know how to save the company without someone else carrying part of it," he said. Ruth wiped flour from her hands. "Then maybe saving it isn't the first thing," she replied. His mouth tightened. "What is?" "Telling the truth about what it costs." Daniel looked through the open office door at the turning shaft, the new wall, the labeled grain, and the people working without waiting for him. For once, he did not offer an answer he had prepared. Daniel remained until the last club order left. He did not sign anything. He did not ask again. When Ruth offered to pay him for the oak saddle, he shook his head. "I use scrap," he said. "Your time isn't scrap. You didn't hire me. You performed work in my building. I was already here. That has never made labor free." His eyes moved toward the ledger on her desk. Apparently it has. Ruth heard the accusation, but also the beginning of comprehension beneath it. "Send an invoice," she said. "I don't want your money. Then send it to Lena." The repair delayed her production. From the bakery, Lena shouted, "I heard that, and I charge late fees for emotional inconvenience." Daniel almost smiled. He tucked the manila envelope beneath his arm. At the main doors, he looked up at the moving belts once more. "I did remember the yellow door," he said. "What?" "When you asked which wheel worked, I remembered where the turbine stairs were. You ought to. You painted that door. Dad said I missed a spot and made me do the whole thing twice. He made you do it twice because you painted over a hinge. That sounds more like him." "It does." Daniel rubbed a smear of oak dust from his sleeve. "I'll call Mid-State." Ruth did not ask what he would tell them. The next morning, she found his invoice on the office fax machine. He charged for 1 hour of labor, no materials, and wrote emergency structural saddle in the description. Lena paid it from her bakery account, adding a note that said, "Next time, bring coffee." Daniel cashed the check. Mercer Contracting did not survive in the form he had fought to preserve. Daniel sold the second crew's equipment and closed the rented office. He retained 3 contracts he could finish with himself, 1 carpenter and a part-time laborer. The hotel dispute ended with a payment smaller than his invoices and larger than Ruth feared. Mid-State accepted a repayment plan secured by Daniel's remaining equipment and a personal note, not Ruth's house. Ruth learned most of this from Melissa, who reported facts without asking Ruth to repair any of them. "He's home before 8 now," she said during one call. "He hates it." Being home, having time to think. Walter considered that a design flaw. Melissa laughed. "Daniel has started cooking. Is that safe? His chili contains an alarming amount of coffee." "On purpose?" He won't answer. Her paycheck continued going into her own account. She and Daniel met with an accountant who was not related to either of them. Melissa did not move out, but she stopped softening every hard fact before placing it in front of her husband. He says, "I'm treating him like an employee," she told Ruth. "Are you paying him?" "No." "Then he'll discover the difference." Ruth and Daniel spoke rarely that spring. He called on Sundays, usually while driving, and asked questions whose answers could not lead to money. How was the belt tracking? Had the roof leaked during the storm? Was Harris's hand any better? Ruth answered what he asked. Neither mentioned the broker, the guarantee, or the way he had described the mill while she stood above him. The grain club survived its first month. 24 members became 30 after Ruth refused 42. A second bakery in Bellwether ordered buckwheat flour for weekend pancakes. May adjusted delivery quantities and charged full price. Lena experimented with a dense rye loaf that sold out every Friday and a buckwheat cookie she insisted was rustic rather than ugly. "It looks like a roofing shingle," Harris said. "It has sea salt. So does the road in January." He ate 3. Nothing about the mill became easy. A damp week swelled the grain chute until it stuck. The new bakery drain backed up during Lena's largest mixing day. 2 club members complained that buckwheat should be white, and one demanded a refund because the flour had expired on the date labeled milled. Ruth gave him his money back and suggested he purchase groceries with fewer verbs. The roof still leaked over the west loft. Insurance rose after the bakery opened. Flour prices could not rise as quickly as grain and packaging costs. When Ruth calculated the first quarter, the mill had earned enough to cover regular expenses, but not enough to repay all the renovation money. Lena found her staring at the figures. "Is it bad?" "It's honest. That is not a number. We are $312 behind the projection." Lena leaned over the ledger. "My second utility payment hasn't cleared. That accounts for $240, so we are $72 behind." "Yes. Raise Harris's pie price. He doesn't pay. There's our leak." Ruth closed the ledger. $72 no longer looked like failure. It looked like a problem with a size. Harris began teaching May how to check the lower bearing temperature by touch and thermometer. May taught Lena to recognize grain moisture without opening a sack. Ruth wrote operating procedures in a binder that everyone mocked and everybody used. She added emergency shutoff instructions, cleaning schedules, lot tracking, and one page titled, "If Ruth is not here." Lena crossed out "if" and wrote "when." "I am here," Ruth said. "You will eventually attend a dentist appointment. I can schedule it on Sunday. You are exactly why the binder exists." Ruth let the correction stand. Summer filled the creek banks with nettles and wild phlox. The decorative road wheel remained frozen, drawing tourists who photographed it and sometimes missed the open bakery entrance entirely. Lena put up a sign with an arrow. "Working mill and fresh bread this way." Ruth objected to the arrow's size. Lena made it larger. In August, the south porch shifted after 3 days of rain. It served as the bakery's secondary loading entrance, and the left rail had begun pulling away from the posts. Ruth closed it with Harris's longest rope. "Harris says no," she wrote on the cardboard. He found the sign and carried it into the office like a commendation. "My influence grows. The porch needs rebuilding. Call Daniel." "No." "Why? I can solicit bids." "Daniel submits bids." "That is not what you meant." "It is exactly what I meant. You've both turned avoiding each other into skilled labor." Ruth requested estimates from 3 contractors. Lena requested a 4th from Daniel without telling her. His came in second lowest. It included the correct foundation depth, a separate cost for replacing the loading threshold, and no family discount. Ruth studied it at the kitchen table. Lena watched from across the room. "You're making the face," she said. "What face?" "The one where fairness becomes inconvenient. The lowest bid is $800 less. The lowest bid specifies treated pine where it meets the stone. It's permitted. It'll look like a deck behind a discount steakhouse." Ruth chose Daniel's bid. Because the porch served Lena's leased space, the bakery contracted the work and paid from the improvement reserve included in her lease. Ruth approved the design as owner. Every boundary was written down. Daniel arrived on a Monday with tools, oak posts, and a thermos that said Mercer Contracting in faded red letters. He worked alone. For 3 days, mother and son occupied opposite sides of the same wall. Ruth milled rye, while Daniel removed rotten porch boards. Lena passed between them, carrying bread and refusing messages. "If he wants to know where the pry bar is, he can ask me," Ruth said. He did not ask. He looked. Then he located it visually. On the fourth morning, Daniel entered the machinery room before Ruth opened the gate. "I need to sister the sill beneath the loading door," he said. "It'll be noisy. We're milling buckwheat at 6. I can wait. You charge by the day. I bid by the job." She nodded. 6 until 10. I'll work on the steps." Their conversations remained like that. Accurate, narrow, surprisingly peaceful. The porch took 8 days. Daniel replaced the failed rail, rebuilt the steps, and shaped the new posts to match the originals without charging for the extra work. Ruth noticed and said nothing until he handed Lena the final invoice. "The post detail wasn't in your bid," she said. "No, you should bill changes. You sound like Melissa. She's right. She usually is." Quietly, which is difficult to defend against. Ruth ran her palm over the smooth oak. Walter would have said the original posts were simpler. Dad would have spent 4 hours explaining why simple took longer. They stood on the finished porch while Lena inspected the threshold with theatrical suspicion. Evening light lay across the creek. The mill had been shut down, but water continued moving through the bypass channel. Daniel nodded toward the machinery room. "Can I see it?" "You've seen it. The wheel." Ruth unlocked the yellow door. They descended carefully. Harris's rope remained coiled on its hook. The turbine housing filled the lower chamber, black iron against damp stone. Ruth shone the flashlight while Daniel crouched behind the guard. "It's smaller than I remember," he said. "You were smaller. I thought the big wheel outside drove everything. That was the first system. Then the north wheel. This turbine ran the east stones. Until the belt failed." "Yes." Daniel touched one finger to the shaft, leaving a mark in the thin grease. "Dad said it was too dangerous." "It was dangerous. We made it less so. You kept greasing it every month, even after the mill closed. Moving parts survive if somebody moves them." He looked at her. "Why this one?" Ruth rested the flashlight on the stone ledge. "The road wheel was for people to admire. Your father kept it painted long after it stopped doing anything. The north wheel was bigger, but its buckets rotted and the axle split. This one was iron, plain, hard to reach. It didn't need to be admired. It needed grease, a clear intake, and somebody willing to come downstairs." "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is." He looked back at the turbine. "Dad ignored it," Ruth said. "Then everybody else did. That didn't make it dead." Daniel's head lowered. Ruth did not rescue him from the meaning. After a while, he said, "I thought you kept the mill because it was his. I did, for a while. And now? Now it has tenants." He laughed once. Ruth picked up the flashlight. "Lena's rent is due Tuesday." At the top of the stairs, Daniel stopped beside the yellow door. "I'm sorry I called it worthless." She waited. "I looked at everything you had left," he continued, "and I only saw what it could do for me. There were apologies designed to close a subject and apologies that opened one." Ruth recognized the difference. "I let you think that way for a long time," she said. "It was easier than correcting you. That doesn't make it your fault. No. But it makes it something I won't do again." He nodded. She did not tell him he was forgiven. He did not ask. They left the door open while the chamber aired. By winter, the mill's regular income covered taxes, insurance, maintenance, and modest payments to Ruth, Harris, and May for their work. It did not replace Daniel's company, fund a retirement fantasy, or turn old timber into treasure. The west loft still needed a roof. Ruth's right hip ached when snow approached. Harris could work only half a day before his hands forced him to stop. On milling mornings, lights came on before dawn. May's truck crossed the bridge with rye and buckwheat. Harris listened to the belts. Lena's ovens warmed the loading room, and the smell of bread moved through the fire door whenever she opened it to complain. Daniel's repaired porch held firm beneath sacks of flour and muddy boots. Ruth arrived with the operating binder tucked beneath one arm. She checked the gate, the bearing, the grain, and the people. Then she stepped back while May opened the first sack, and Harris showed Lena how to read the temperature gauge. On her desk, beside the ledgers, waited a loaf of warm rye wrapped in brown paper. Ruth opened the upstream gate. Below the floor, the old iron wheel gathered the creak and turned.